Welcome to our channel. Hollywood Movie Review. The Devil Wears Prada 2 2026 Movie Review. The Devil Wears Prada 2 is a 2026 American comedy drama film directed by David Frankel and written by Aline Brosh McKenna. A sequel to the 2006 film The Devil Wears Prada, it sees Meryl Streep, Anne Hathaway, Emily Blunt, and Stanley Tucci reprising their roles, joined by Justin Theroux, Lucy Liu, and Kenneth Branagh. Set 2 decades after the events of the first film, it follows Andy Sachs, Hathaway, as she helps Miranda Priestley, Streep, navigate a new media landscape and corporate threats to the survival of Runway magazine. Despite the success of The Devil Wears Prada, Streep and Hathaway were initially hesitant about the prospects of a sequel. Development on the film began in July 2024, with all 4 leading actors, Streep, Hathaway, Blunt, and Tucci, signing on to reprise their roles, and Frankel and McKenna returning to direct and write, respectively. Additional castings for new characters were revealed between then and November 2025. Principal photography took place from June to October 2025 in Manhattan and Milan, with additional filming in Newark, New Jersey. The Devil Wears Prada 2 premiered on April 20, 2026, in New York, and was released in theaters in the United States by 20th Century Studios on May 1. The film received generally positive reviews from critics and was a box office success, grossing $689.4 million on a $100 million production budget, becoming the 4th highest grossing film of 2026 2 decades after leaving her position as an assistant at Runway magazine. Andy Sachs has become a respected reporter in New York City. However, her entire newsroom is abruptly laid off by text message during an awards gala. Meanwhile, Miranda Priestley, Andy's old Runway boss, is under fire for publishing a puff piece about a brand that uses sweatshop labor. To improve the magazine's credibility, IRV Ravitz, the owner of Runway's parent company, Elias Clark, and Miranda's boss, hires Andy as the features editor without Miranda's consent, to her annoyance. An uncharacteristically listless Miranda struggles to navigate modern fashion media. Although some of her tyrannical office behaviors remain, HR complaints have blunted her imperiousness. On the other hand, she enjoys a comfortable relationship with her husband, Stuart. Miranda's right-hand man Nigel Kipling explains that nobody reads Runway's print edition anymore and that the brand has been forced to embrace online clickbait and cheaply made short-form content to maintain profits and relationships with advertisers. One key advertiser is Dior, which employs Emily Charlton, Andy's former Runway co-worker. Emily leverages the controversy over the Runway puff piece to secure her own puff piece, which Miranda assigns to Andy. During the interview, Emily and Andy argue about how modern fashion raises prices and shuts out middle-class consumers. After writing serious articles that gain minimal traction, Andy improves her standing at Runway by brokering a coveted interview with Sasha Barnes, the reclusive divorcee of a Silicon Valley billionaire. IRV promises to make Miranda global head of content at Elias Clark, but dies from a heart attack at his 75th birthday party before he can officially announce the promotion. His son, Jay, takes over Elias Clark, but lacks sentimental attachment to either fashion or Runway. He puts Miranda's promotion on hold while bringing in management consultants to recommend cost cuts. To Andy's surprise, Miranda bears with it. Meanwhile, Andy's relationship with her new boyfriend Peter sours when she unintentionally insults his job as an apartment renovator while fretting that she may lose her own position. Considering her options, Andy explores writing a tell-all about Miranda with a publisher, who offers her a lucrative contract, but Andy is conflicted. During Milan Fashion Week, Nigel throws what may be his last big Runway gala, starring Lady Gaga. Andy devises a plan to save Runway by convincing a wealthy patron to buy it from Jay. The patron is Benji, Sasha's ex-husband, and Emily's current boyfriend. Andy and Emily reveal the plan to Miranda, who is furious because she knows Emily plans to take her position at Runway. Miranda admits that she pushed Emily out of Runway because Emily lacks creative vision. Miranda tries to take the loss with grace, but while talking to Benji, she is alarmed by his vision of Runway's staff being replaced by AI. To prevent Benji and Emily from destroying Runway, Miranda directs Andy to find a competing buyer. Andy convinces Sasha to buy not just Runway but all of Elias Clark, and Jay accepts her offer, pulling out of his deal with Benji. Miranda realizes she has taken Nigel for granted over the years. To make amends, she invites him to deliver the gala's keynote speech in her place, so she and Andy can finalize the deal with Sasha, who gives Miranda the promotion IRV promised her. As the Runway staff return to New York, Miranda admits to Andy that the latter's idealism inspired her to fight back. She also reveals that she knows about Andy's plans for a tell-all and encourages her to write it, including the negative aspects of Miranda's life. Andy reconciles with Peter and a defeated Emily, who Benji has broken up with. Nigel reveals he was the one who prompted IRV to rehire Andy, as he has always liked her. Miranda gives Andy a nicer office and returns to work with a renewed imperiousness. In 2013, Lauren Weisberger wrote and published Revenge Wears Prada, The Devil Returns, a sequel to her 2003 novel The Devil Wears Prada, which had been adapted into the 2006 film. However, it did not seem likely that an adaptation of that novel, or any sequel, would be made, as starring cast members Meryl Streep and Anne Hathaway were not eager to do such a film. Streep reportedly said she was not interested, while Hathaway stated she would like to work with the same people on something totally different. In July 2024, it was reported that Walt Disney Studios, the parent division of 20th Century Studios, was interested in developing a sequel. Negotiations began that month with Aline Brosh McKenna returning to write the screenplay, and Streep, Hathaway, Emily Blunt, and Stanley Tucci reprising their roles from the first film. A $100 million budget was allotted for production, almost triple the cost of the original film, unadjusted for inflation. David Frankel, who returned as director, said that most of the difference was accounted for by actors' salaries and we had basically the same budget for making the movie as we did the first one. It was later revealed that Streep, Hathaway, and Blunt had pay parity on the sequel, each receiving $12.5 million upfront plus back-ends contingent on the film's performance, with the potential to ultimately earn over $20 million each. Principal photography began on June 30, 2025, with Frankel again directing, and Kenneth Branagh joining the cast. In July, it was announced that Tracy Thoms and Tibor Feldman would also reprise their roles, with Simone Ashley, Lucy Liu, Justin Theroux, B.J. Novak, Pauline Calumet, Rachel Bloom, and Patrick Bramall joining the cast as new additions. Streep, Hathaway, and Tucci were spotted filming in Manhattan during the week of July 21, 2025. Blunt was spotted for the first time a week later. Bramall and Hathaway were spotted filming a scene together on August 5. An important airport scene was shot at Newark on September 10. Tucci and Streep filmed at Dolce & Gabbana's Milan Fashion Week show on September 27. Filming took place in Milan, Italy, from October 6 to 18. In October, Donatella Versace was seen on set filming a cameo appearance, while Lady Gaga was announced to have a role. Ashley finished filming her scenes on October 17. Filming officially wrapped on October 20. By November, Caleb Heron, Helen J. Shen, Conrad Ricamora, and Callum Harper were also announced to have been cast. In April 2026, it was revealed that Sydney Sweeney, who was meant to cameo as herself, was cut from the finished film. Some filming locations attracted crowds of onlookers after social media reported that scenes were being filmed there, which had not happened with the first film. According to production designer Jess Gonker, who also returned from the original, it was a mob scene at the American Museum of Natural History, again standing in for the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Fortunately, he says, the production needed a crowd for the scene anyway, so it helped. A large crowd in the meatpacking district also watched the filming of the scene where Andy boards the Hampton Jitney. The shoot was the middle of summer and it was pretty special to see people embracing the movie like that. It never disrupted the filming, but it did make everyone feel like the Beatles. Overzealous. Paparazzi, however, did disrupt filming by fighting among themselves while Hathaway and Tucci were filming a scene, causing them to break character. Gonker, the production designer for the first film, returned for the sequel. The runway offices were again sets built at Kaufman Astoria Studios in Queens, but this time, he told Architectural Digest, they were 8 times larger, showing the space the original was meant only to suggest. With the new offices, we're creating more of a visual story. We opened the whole thing up so it wasn't just about Miranda and the assistants. The former McGraw-Hill building at 1221 Avenue of the Americas again served American Samoa, the exterior and lobby of the Elias Clark building. A large room was set up as a cafeteria. Saying the words "The Devil Wears Prada" opened a lot of doors for us this time around and got us access into places we hadn't been able to before, Gonker said. In New York, that meant the production was allowed to film at the Dior Boutique at 57th Street and Madison Avenue before it opened, as well as in the lobby of the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, which had been closed for 6 years for renovations. For Emily's office, newly opened space in the Hudson Yards development was used. Marc Jacobs allowed the production into his fitting rooms. The crew got permission to use the same townhouse that had been Miranda's in the first film. While Manhattan's Woolworth Mansion stood in for the interiors of the hotel rooms in Milan, many other scenes set in Milan were filmed on location or elsewhere in Italy. The Palazzo Parigi and Grand Spa Milano, where the cast stayed while shooting, lent its exterior and lobby for filming, leading Tucci and Theroux to have martinis there between scenes. Lady Gaga's appearance was originally planned for the Piazza del Duomo but was moved to the Accademia di Brera to prevent word of her appearance from spreading. The dinner scene in the refectory of Santa Maria del Grazie was filmed on a set built to 3/4 scale, including a hand-painted replication of Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper, by a team of craftsmen led by a woman who manages set design for a Roman opera house. Since they were not allowed to use the actual painting, we had to really study that thing, Gonker says. On several private tours, we were allowed to take our time and figure out how we wanted to replicate it, just myself and a couple other people, no crowds. It was a really special thing to get to do. After a lengthy boat tour of Lake Como, Gonker chose Villa del Balbiano as Benji's villa. We knew that Emily and Benji would arrive by boat, and we also wanted viewers to see the house from the lake, too, so that they were really brought into this lavish environment. The film's soundtrack album was released through 20th Century Studios and Interscope Records on the same day as the film's North American debut. It is led by the single Runway by Lady Gaga and Doechii, which was previewed on the film's second trailer released on April 6, 2026, ahead of its official release on April 9. Lady Gaga also contributed 2 more original songs, Shape of a Woman, which she performs in the film, and Glamorous Life. There is also a scores-only soundtrack by composer Theodore Shapiro, returning from the first film, featuring 20 tracks and totaling 39 minutes. The first teaser trailer was released on November 12, 2025. It was reportedly the most viewed comedy trailer in 15 years, with 181.5 million views in its first 24 hours alone. The film's color grading and lighting as presented in the trailer sparked numerous comments on social media and in the press, lamenting the widespread adoption of the Netflix look across the film industry, standardized colors, loss of contrast, resulting in a smooth and flat visual rendering. The film's first full trailer, released on February 1, 2026, recorded 222 million views within its first 24 hours, which 20th Century Studios described as the most viewed trailer in the studio's history. In April 2026, Anna Wintour, the former editor-in-chief of Vogue and the purported inspiration for Streep's character Miranda Priestley, appeared on the cover of the magazine alongside the actress. Later that month, Streep and Hathaway traveled to South Korea to promote the film and participated in an interview with singer Jang Won-young. The marketing campaign for The Devil Wears Prada 2 was reportedly one of the largest film promotional efforts ever undertaken by Disney. The Hollywood Reporter estimated the campaign's promotional value at $250 million, supported by brand partnerships with Dior, Google, the Coca-Cola Company, Grey Goose, Mercedes-Benz, L'Oreal, Zillow, Trezom, and United Airlines. The Devil Wears Prada 2 premiered at Lincoln Center in New York City on April 20, 2026, with the event being live-streamed on Disney Plus and Hulu. Another premiere was held 2 days later in London. It premiered in Tokyo at Roppongi Hills on April 24. The film was released in 4,150 theaters in the United States on May 1, 2026. Disney had originally scheduled Avengers: Doomsday for May 1, but moved The Devil Wears Prada 2 to that date instead after the film was fast-tracked during production. The Devil Wears Prada 2 was released on digital download on June 30, 2026, and is scheduled to be released on 4K Ultra HD and Blu-ray on July 28. A DVD bundle with the first film and the sequel, including extra features, is scheduled for release on the same date. The film will be available to stream on Disney Plus and Hulu starting on July 29. As of July 12, 2026, The Devil Wears Prada 2 has grossed $220.4 million in the United States and Canada, and $469 million in other territories, for a worldwide total of $689.40 million in the United States and Canada. The film made $32.5 million on its opening day, including $10 million from Thursday previews. For its opening weekend, it earned $76.7 million, topping the box office and becoming the fourth biggest debut for a 2026 film. It also outgrossed the original film's opening of $27.5 million in 2006, almost tripling its earnings or doubling them when adjusted for inflation. Outside of the United States and Canada, the film made $27.5 million on its opening day, which added up to $114.6 million globally, marking the best opening day of 2026 in 16 countries. It grossed $156.6 million internationally during its opening weekend for a total of $233.6 million, becoming the second best worldwide opening for a 2026 Motion Picture Association film, behind the Super Mario Galaxy movie, $372.5 million. It opened at number 1 in almost all major markets and marked the highest grossing weekends of 2026 in multiple countries. The film was the highest global opening weekend for Streep and Blunt, beating Mamma Mia, Here We Go Again, 2018, and Oppenheimer, 2023, respectively. On the review aggregator website Rotten Tomatoes, 78% of 338 critics' reviews are positive, with an average rating of 6.6/10. The website's consensus reads, Meryl Streep still wears Miranda Priestly like a finely tailored suit in this sinfully enjoyable sequel, which is dressed to the nines in off-the-rack wish fulfillment and some trenchant observations about the state of modern media. Metacritic, which uses a weighted average, assigned the film a score of 63 out of 100, based on 57 critics, indicating generally favorable reviews. Audiences polled by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of A on an A+ to F scale, up from the first film's B. Justin Chang of The New Yorker wrote that the film is selling a truckload of preposterous goods, but it sells them awfully well, with unfeigned assurance, conviction, and the appropriate ratio of cynicism to hope. David Sims of The Atlantic wrote, it has plenty of breezy fun probing the dilemmas of modern media, without abandoning the glitz that made the original so enduring. O.D. Henderson of the Boston Globe wrote, Miranda is given more depth this time, which softens her just a tad, but it forces the viewer to root for her success. That would bug me, but The Devil Wears Prada 2 successfully gives journalists a bigger villain to hiss at and resent. Clarice Luffrey of The Independent wrote that the film hits painfully home, and perpetual job insecurity is hardly exclusive to the media world. Yet even for those who can't relate, there's still plenty of the indulgent, fondant pleasures to take part in. In a negative review, Moira MacDonald of the Seattle Times wrote that the film gives us a lot to look at, and Hathaway and Blunt in particular are a pleasure, but it's flat champagne, maybe worth drinking in a pinch, but unsatisfying. Randy Myers of the Mercury News wrote, "Yes, it is indeed a pleasure to hang out with these characters again, and there are a few good laughs here and there. But The Devil Wears Prada 2 feels like it came off the rack before it was ready. It feels about as groundbreaking as Florals in Spring." The Globe and Mail's Johanna Schneller opined that, unlike the original film, The Devil Wears Prada 2 has zero idea what it's about, in particular seeing its social commentary as soft and inconsistent. On April 16, 2026, 20th Century Studios released a clip for the film on its YouTube channel, featuring Hathaway's character Andy alongside her assistant, Jin Chaobi, portrayed by Chinese-American actress Helen J. Shen. Shen's character drew criticism for its alleged use of racist tropes, as observers noted that the character's name bore phonetic resemblance to Ching Chong, a racial slur historically used to mock the Chinese language and people. Critics also wrote that the character was portrayed wearing comparatively dowdy clothing and glasses, in contrast to other characters, and was shown reciting her academic achievements, which they interpreted as reinforcing the nerdy bookworm stereotype often associated with Asian people. The character's name was initially misreported as Chin-jo in a widely circulated social media hearsay, a rendering that more closely resembled the racial slur and further fueled the controversy, particularly in East Asia. The Asian American Foundation, TAAF, called it unfortunate that offensive stereotypes continue to color how Asian American communities are perceived today, whether spread intentionally or not. In response to the controversy, the writer McKenna stated that the character Jin Chao was named after a childhood friend and is a very dimensional character, adding that she is her love letter to all the wonderful Gen Z assistants I've had who are so enterprising and intelligent. Korean-American filmmaker Joseph Kahn pushed back the criticisms, stating Jin's outfit is actually very couture in a film about fashion. Her glasses and hair clips are of the moment. The body shape disparity comes from Anne Hathaway, who mandated there would be diversity of sizes, which could either be taken as genuine virtue signaling or an actress wanting to be the skinniest and tallest on screen. Nevertheless, the Asian character is being depicted as a fashionable striver in the fashion world with typical Gen Z neurodivergency. Although all the Italian actors who had provided the voices for the original film when it was dubbed reprised their roles for the sequel, some Italian viewers were unsatisfied with the dub. Maria Pia Di Meo, who has voiced Streep's characters in every Italian dubbed film of hers, was 86 at the time of the release of The Devil Wears Prada 2, 10 years older than Streep, and some viewers said she sounded distinctly older than Miranda looked. More generally, some lines took longer to say in Italian than in English, resulting in a lack of synchronization with the characters' mouths. When Andy Sachs first went to work for Miranda Priestley at Runway magazine 20 years ago, she wasn't sure what to expect from the devilish editor-in-chief. She'd been warned that Miranda was harsh and demanding, but she'd also heard that a recommendation from New York's Dragon Lady would pretty much guarantee Andy a job at any publication in the city. Andy's brief stint as Miranda's assistant wasn't easy. She didn't click with her sample-size colleagues, who called her fat and ridiculed her fashion sense or lack thereof. Miranda barked orders at Andy, sometimes reducing Andy to tears, and tasked her with impossible assignments, such as getting a preview copy of the latest Harry Potter book for her twins. But Andy endured. She perhaps even impressed Miranda, though it can be hard to tell from the Snow Queen's icy demeanor. And Andy indeed went on to work for some of New York's finest magazines and newspapers. Now, Andy is a successful journalist. She's even up for some writing awards. Unfortunately, the world of print journalism has changed quite a bit in the last 20 years. For starters, it's no longer print. Everything Andy writes gets posted online. Getting advertisers and subscribers to support publications is more difficult than ever. So just as Andy stands to accept a prestigious award for her talents, she receives a text informing her that she and her colleagues at the Vanguard have been fired, since the paper just wasn't making enough money to justify keeping it around. Things aren't looking much better for Miranda at Runway. It seems that the company's human resources department finally caught up to her. She's not allowed to insult and belittle her employees anymore, and she's required to learn their names, now, too. She must hang up her own coat instead of tossing it at her assistants. And although she was promised a promotion recently, that's been put on hold after she greenlit a glowing review of a brand that turned out to be a front for a sweatshop. Miranda's future, indeed, the future of Runway itself, is in flux. Fortunately, Miranda's boss thinks he may have a solution. After watching a video of Andy giving an impassioned speech about the integrity of journalism, he hires her as Runway's new features editor. He believes that Andy's reporting mixed with Miranda's experience could help the fashion magazine establish some much-needed credibility. Unfortunately, Miranda is none too enthused about the idea. It's not that she doesn't like Andy. In fact, she seems to scarcely remember her former assistant, but Miranda prefers to do things her own way. She's usually 10 steps ahead of anyone scheming against her, so this sudden appointment takes her by surprise. Miranda, to her employees and certainly to Andy, just may be the devil wearing Prada, and you know what they say about hell hath no fury. When Andy is let go from the Vanguard, she worries more for her co-workers than she does for herself. She even offers to help a few of them find work so they can make ends meet. And she stands out as someone who prefers to build people up, even horrible people like Miranda, rather than tear them down. Miranda's husband is loving and supportive. Miranda, who has had difficulty maintaining relationships in the past due to her commitment to her career, seems to truly appreciate the sacrifices he has made for her. A few characters put aside old grudges to form new friendships. A few people apologize for their past mistakes and take steps to make amends with those they wronged. Friends support and encourage one another. Miranda isn't blind to her many faults. She knows that her career has taken its toll on her relationships, particularly those with her children and husband. She has continued working because she loves her job, but she offers a cautionary note to anyone who would follow in her footsteps, emphasizing that they should know the cost. In a poignant scene between Miranda and Andy, the two observe Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper while visiting Milan. They're led into the room where it's located by a member of the clergy, scouting the place for a high-profile supper of their own. Miranda says that the artist did not paint a halo over Christ's head in order to signify that Jesus was just a man, to show that we are all imperfect humans. Real-world information about the painting indicates that Miranda is at least partially correct. Da Vinci allegedly wanted to emphasize Jesus' humanness over his divinity. But Miranda's thoughts also seem introspective, as if she is recognizing her own mistakes and trying to excuse her errors somehow. One woman has avoided interviews with the press because she doesn't want to answer questions about her recent, and public, divorce. Miranda, who has been through several highly publicized divorces of her own, is sympathetic, telling the woman that she shouldn't be defined by her ex-husband. The woman enthusiastically agrees, proudly stating that she won't be defined by her new husband either, revealing that she's engaged to someone new. Andy passionately kisses a man whom she's dating. A woman slaps her boyfriend's hand away when he greets her by trying to grab her rear, and he jokes that it's how he says hello. Andy confesses to a friend that while she has slept with a couple of former colleagues, she never did so to boost her career. Some of the fashion designs we see on runways show quite a bit of skin. Indeed, in one show, the models appear to be wearing lingerie-inspired garb. Andy and many other women wear cleavage-bearing outfits as well. We see a woman in a towel from the shoulders up. Miranda makes a sarcastic remark about suicide. When someone tells her she can't say that, she defends that she wasn't talking about killing other people. Elsewhere, she makes an unkind joke about human trafficking. A man collapses at a party, knocking over a table and breaking several dishes. Panicked onlookers perform CPR, but we later learn he died. Characters drink alcohol at dinners, parties, and other special occasions. It's implied that one man may have previously struggled with drinking. There's a casual discussion about steroids and weight loss drugs. Miranda mentions a methadone clinic. Miranda, known for her stinging sarcasm, has been effectively leashed by Runway's HR department. Whenever she says something untoward, we hear disparaging remarks about weight, drug use, and suicide. Her assistant Amari corrects her, letting Miranda know what is and isn't appropriate to say in a work setting. Miranda usually responds with an eye roll. But sometimes she genuinely doesn't know how to express herself without causing offense. People purposely insult and offend others. Miranda, who is of an older generation, gets called a relic online. A few of the people who work at Runway say some unkind things about Andy's style. Emily, another of Miranda's former assistants, is obsessed with appearances, particularly weight. She laments that many funeral goers are wearing a rival brand's clothing. Others in the fashion industry seem to be similarly out of touch with reality, growing upset when they're asked to fly economy instead of first class and to take ride shares instead of private cars. When Andy gets hired, she's unaware that someone else already holds her new title. Miranda tries to shame Andy into quitting by firing that person over the phone. She appears to not remember who Andy is, and it's never clear whether she's pretending or not. People lie and manipulate, scheming to bolster their own careers, often at the expense of others. Management consultants advise a brand owner to simply fire anyone who has worked at the company for more than 5 years as a way to cut costs. One of Miranda's assistants asks his co-worker to answer phones for him while he uses the bathroom. Miranda's rules stipulate that the phone can never go unanswered or the person responsible will be fired, but the co-worker refuses, implying that he should have thought about how much liquid he was consuming beforehand. When The Devil Wears Prada came out 20 years ago, it almost instantly became a hit with female audiences. Even women who weren't that into fashion loved seeing all the clothes. They were entranced by Meryl Streep's quietly cruel Miranda, Stanley Tucci's sarcastically delightful Nigel, and Emily Blunt's desperately chic Emily. And they adored Anne Hathaway's defiant, size 6 Andy Sachs. If that's what viewers loved about the original, then they'll enjoy The Devil Wears Prada too. Though perhaps not as biting or clever as the first film, it's still good sentimental fun. There's certainly some content to consider. Language is generally infrequent, but there are 2 pointed uses of the F word. The fashion we see can be revealing. And there seems to be an unhealthy nonchalance regarding divorce. But this sequel tries to be kinder than its predecessor. It reins in Nigel's unhinged remarks and Emily's unhealthy eating habits. Andy proves to be a staid and supportive friend even to those who try to tear her down. And even Miranda seems to learn how to trust those around her, how to be a team player at work and at home instead of running a one-woman show. Many parents will still want to consider how such a film might impact their teen daughter's view of the fashion industry, how it tends to be focused on outer beauty and casts disparity on anyone who, gasp, shops at thrift stores. However, for more mature viewers capable of discerning the film's messages about friendship and encouragement, it could be a nostalgic romp. Gird your loins, fellow journalists. Amid all the luxurious high fashion and expensive high-heeled stilettos, The Devil Wears Prada 2 reminds us of something else unattainable in today's world. No, it is not a baby blue Marc Jacobs bag that is sold out everywhere. It is, instead, a stable editorial job at a respectable publication that is more interested in serious journalism than consolidating with a tech bro mindset and turning into a content farm before vanishing forever. Wait, isn't this highly anticipated follow-up to 2006's trace chic and genuinely magnific The Devil Wears Prada supposed to be a bit of a fantasy where we can swoon over clothes, apartments, and lifestyles most of us cannot afford? Rest assured, there will be plenty of that, albeit with a number of iffy wardrobe choices. More on this soon, including a Milan excursion, and a Lake Como outing somewhere in the George and Amal neighborhood. No, the Clooneys don't make an appearance here. But taking a tonal cue from its predecessor, the film serves up a welcome dose of reality, too, this time, about just how bad things are everywhere in media. Parent company. Merging. Downsizing. Content. If you find any of these words and phrases triggering, well, you at least have a supposed ally in the sequel, one that doesn't quite find its balance or rhythm on its familiar catwalk. The great Anne Hathaway returns as the delightful and talented Andy Sachs, now working as the kind of serious journalist she always wanted to be before becoming a runway magazine dropout in the first movie, which was directed by David Frankel and written by Aline Brosh McKenna in an adaptation of Lauren Weisberger's bestseller. Frankel and McKenna are also at the helm of this original story. 20 years have passed since the release of the first film, and since the flip phones depicted in it, when Andy was hired to serve as editorial legend Miranda Priestley's, Meryl Streep, in an iconic turn, second assistant in the fashion world, and left her job abruptly during a Paris Fashion Week trip in the midst of a moral awakening. If I'm being honest, I cared neither for Andy's friends nor her boyfriend Nate, Adrian Grenier, back then. I still don't. And I never thought Andy had a moral obligation to quit her job. Sure, her boss was a true nightmare and, among other things, made work-life balance non-existent for her, but Andy had a sound plan and worked very hard to become indispensable to her team amid the opportunity of a lifetime. A little more support of her choices, and a little less dismissing of fashion as trivial and beneath her, would have gone a long way. That subtle ambition shaming aside, the first movie still opened a door for Andy by its end, which the sequel abruptly closes at the beginning. Adding insult to injury, Andy is about to accept a prestigious journalism award when her entire table receives the same text message that practically fires them on the spot. This kind of thing happens routinely in journalism these days after a soulless big company or an ignorant billionaire swallows up an outlet and its proud legacy. In recent years, I had colleagues stranded in places they traveled to for work, after they got fired via email and locked out of their accounts while still on the said work trip. And it is only realistic that layoffs would eventually find Andy, regardless of how talented she is. Still, she accepts her award in tears, delivering a passionate speech about the sorry state of affairs that we're all braving in the real world. Enter Runway and Miranda again, after Andy mysteriously lands a new job at her first professional home to reshape the editorial direction of the magazine. Battling with a PR nightmare after the magazine's accidental praise of a highly unethical supplier, neither Miranda nor her right-hand Nigel, Stanley Tucci, wonderful, recalls Andy at first glance. She is promptly placed in an embarrassing office that looks like a stockroom and paired with the hard-working assistant Jin, Helen J. Shen, who is as smart and ambitious as the young Andy. Meanwhile, Miranda's two assistants are Amari, Simone Ashley, and Charlie, Caleb Heron, both intriguing enough but underdeveloped. There have been some complaints to the HR, Charlie tells a shocked Andy in one scene when she witnesses Miranda hanging up her own coat. Apparently, she used to throw her coats to her assistants. Indeed, this Miranda lives in a different world, a world where abusive bosses got their reckoning in more immediate terms, well, at least for a while, a world where work-life balance gained more urgency since COVID, and a world where print publications lost their relevance, as well as budgets, amid mindless online noise and click-driven success metrics that drive down quality. The September issue is so thin that you can practically floss with it, Miranda says dispassionately in a telling moment that can only mean Runway might be on its way out. Throughout the film, there are signs of that loss of relevance in Miranda's eyes. Streep knowingly portrays her not with overt authority and confidence, but with an undercurrent of defeat. In that, Miranda no longer seems sure of her place in a world of content that she wants to rule. Content sounds like nails on a chalkboard every time someone on the screen says it. But she seems lost in other ways too. It's almost like neither Frankel nor McKenna knew what exactly to do with her. She is a bit softened, but not entirely. She still reaches for an offensive remark or two as Miranda does. But while those quietly delivered insults are consistent with her character in the first movie, they feel underbaked here and land like afterthoughts of a script trying to piece together a new story while winking at the old one. That lackluster story development sadly reflects on the rest of the characters, too, including Miranda's former first assistant Emily Charlton, Emily Blunt, also terrific, now working for Dior, considering whether or not to allocate her budget elsewhere amid Runway's PR troubles. The movie goes out of its way to give us the fans what we want with winks at florals for spring, renewed old grudges, and emotional awakenings, the most memorable of which belongs to Nigel. But what it forgets to do is take the audience on a character-driven journey, as in the first movie, where everyone feels essential and every dot is connected. Much like the outlets bought out of greed and turned into a random assortment of clickbait posts, this edition feels like a disjointed collection of serviceable yet forgettable scenes. Many of those scenes revolve around Andy getting word that Runway, as they know it, is about to become history. To save the magazine, she pursues a holy grail interview with the billionaire philanthropist Sacha Barnes, Lucy Liu, who is coming out of an eventful divorce from her greedy tech boss ex and is looking to give away her assets to female-forward causes she believes in. The interview is this installment's version of getting the unpublished manuscript of the new Harry Potter book, except it doesn't have the same high-stakes effect because we never quite buy into Sacha Barnes' significance in the world the film creates, despite Liu's best efforts. Elsewhere, there are new romantic interests for Andy and Miranda, played by Patrick Bramall and Kenneth Branagh, respectively. While they are welcome additions to the cast, we don't feel much chemistry in these relationships, especially between Bramall and Hathaway. Also taking a back seat here is the directorial style. The masterful opening sequence of the original movie that introduces us to the notorious Priestley by its end and unfolds like a superbly edited short film in its own right doesn't have an equivalent here. Neither does a transformed Andy's seamless walk through NYC streets and runway hallways in different outfits. The fashion here gave me brief pauses, too. Taking the costume design duties from Patricia Field is her longtime collaborator, Molly Rogers. Overall, she establishes Andy's style soundly as an editorial powerhouse who has found her own image since the first film. Still, there is something stale about some of her pinstriped suits and looks, with one notable exception, an exquisite Armani Prive jumpsuit she wears at a key moment. Streep's wardrobe, on the other hand, is appropriately powerful and classical when her skirt silhouettes are more fitted and pencil, and less A-line and belong to what Emily Charlton would call a hideous skirt convention. Meanwhile, it's refreshing to see enduring pieces by Miranda that she would have collected over time, counterbalancing an inexplicable Dries Van Noten tassel deck jacket that she wears into fashion victim territory. As for Emily, it's hard to imagine anyone working for Dior wearing a shirt with the word Dior in giant letters. Still, she and Nigel seem like the only characters in the film who've evolved their looks in believable ways in 20 years. What I found to be the biggest head-scratcher in The Devil Wears Prada 2 is its seemingly happy resolution, in which it is more or less a billionaire who saves the day and the future of journalism, at least for a while. True, if large sums of money can destroy meaningful and useful things, it can rebuild them too. But does it ever in today's world, once the movie starts off engaging with us on realistic terms until its cop-out ending? The film's exceedingly naive good billionaire angle aside, it's nice to reunite with old characters that we love. Witness a healthy dose of fan servicing. The finale between Andy and Emily is especially shameless yet wonderful, and get a glimpse of that braid-knit cerulean sweater again, which, I admit, I liked much better in its original lumpy form. But you can't help but wish that this edition of the story was a bit more groundbreaking. I watched The Devil Wears Prada 2 and I'm sorry to say I felt totally disappointed and underwhelmed with this. These feelings were not what I was expecting or even hoping for when I walked into the theater. But the longer I watched this film, the more disappointed I became. The first Devil Wears Prada film was released in 2006, adapted from the popular novel of the same name by Lauren Weisberger, first published in 2003. This 2006 film is a light-hearted coming-of-age tale centered around Anne Hathaway, playing the wide-eyed girl trying to manage her difficult job in New York City. But on a closer look, The Devil Wears Prada is a power fantasy in this seductive world of fashion journalism. This world is one set mostly behind the scenes that before this film didn't get much space in the general pop culture spotlight. Now in the sequel, 20 years later, Anne Hathaway's character, Andy, has become a respected print journalist who returns to the office of Runway magazine as their features editor. Her hiring is a desperate attempt to make Runway more relevant in the changing world of publishing. Yet again, Andy works under the stern and icy leadership of the editor-in-chief of Runway, Miranda Priestley, played by Meryl Streep. When the magazine's ownership is forced into jeopardy, Andy and Miranda have to get creative to keep the magazine alive and keep their jobs. My disappointment in the sequel comes from three things. First, the four main characters act exactly the same as they did in the previous film. Nobody appears to have any mental development or maturation, especially Anne Hathaway, who acts like a naive, plucky teenager. Since these characters have gone through such little changes in their lives, their dialogue feels the same too. Which brings me to my second disappointment. The nostalgia for the first film is so forced and so prevalent, I started thinking, does the sequel even have enough of its own content to fill its 2-hour runtime? There's far too many lines, too many joke attempts and too many musical cues referencing moments from the first film. I felt I was being force-fed the collective memories of the fans who made the first film a hit. Any sequel is obliged to have some references to its predecessor, but this one has far too many. Thirdly, this film has too much going on to be believable or focused. Andy develops a new love interest when buying a new apartment. A billionaire technology genius toys with buying the Runway magazine. Lady Gaga makes an appearance and sings an original song on a runway during a fashion show. And Miranda has a new life partner of her own played by Kenneth Branagh, who I'm assuming was cast to add some acting prestige to this. Trying to juggle so many subplots in one film, the screenplay drops them all in its clumsy continuity and cheerfulness. Every single character's storyline is wrapped up perfectly by the end, making me think the screenwriter, Eileen Bross McKenna, was forced to keep the story as bright and as polished as possible. With nothing interesting or new to say, The Devil Wears Prada 2 feels manufactured and overly produced, even though the first film's director, David Frankel, also directed the sequel. It feels like Ryan Seacrest directed or co-produced this one. It looks glamorous and without visual blemishes, but it has nothing lasting or memorable to say. I'm so sorry this ended up being my review for this film. There is always a quiet fear that comes with revisiting something beloved. Especially a film like The Devil Wears Prada, which has long since transcended its genre to become part of pop culture language itself. So walking into The Devil Wears Prada 2, I carried equal parts excitement and hesitation. Excited to spend time with characters that feel oddly personal after all these years, and cautious about whether lightning could strike twice. What I did not expect was a sequel that feels both comfortably familiar and surprisingly tuned into the anxieties of our present moment. It plays things fairly straight as a sequel, but there is a clear respect for what made these characters resonate in the first place, and that goes a long way. I revisited the original just before this, so the comparison was right there in my mind, and surprisingly, very little here felt out of step. That sense of continuity is perhaps the film's greatest strength. It does not try to reinvent the wheel. It simply asks what happens when the wheel has been rolling for 20 years in a world that no longer looks the same. From the very beginning, there is a slight clunkiness in how the film engineers its reunion. Getting these characters back into the same orbit after so long takes a bit of narrative maneuvering, and you can feel the gears turning. But once that initial setup is out of the way, the film finds its rhythm, and more importantly, its voice. And what a pleasure it is to see this cast again. Meryl Streep, Anne Hathaway, Emily Blunt, and Stanley Tucci slip back into their roles with an ease that feels almost surreal. These are not performances that need reintroduction. They are lived in, deeply understood, and carried forward with a quiet confidence. It genuinely feels like no time has passed, yet enough has changed beneath the surface to make their journeys feel meaningful. And Meryl Streep, she just elevates everything. Every single time. Her Miranda Priestley remains the gravitational center of the film, but what is fascinating here is not just her authority, but her adaptation. This Miranda is no longer operating in a world that automatically bends to her will. The landscape has shifted. Social media dictates trends, digital platforms dominate attention, and the very idea of gatekeeping has eroded. Streep plays this tension beautifully. The control is still there, razor sharp as ever, but now it is accompanied by an awareness that the ground beneath her is constantly moving. The film wisely leans into this. It is not just about fashion anymore. It is about survival. About relevance. About what it means to be an institution in an era that thrives on disruption. At the same time, the rest of the ensemble brings a warmth and familiarity that anchors the story. Anne Hathaway's Andy has evolved into a figure that feels painfully recognizable in today's media ecosystem. Her arc, in particular, hits harder than expected. There is a quiet frustration in watching someone pour their passion into work that risks disappearing into an endless content void. It is a thread that resonates deeply, especially if you have any connection to creative industries. Emily Blunt continues to be a scene stealer, delivering some of the film's sharpest lines with impeccable timing, while Stanley Tucci remains the emotional glue, bringing both humor and heart in equal measure. And yes, Nigel continues to be the most precious character in this world. At this point, he is less a character and more a comforting presence. Visually, the film understands exactly what it needs to deliver. The outfits are not just good, they are essential. Miranda and Andy's wardrobe alone deserve its own standing ovation. There is a tactile pleasure in watching these sequences unfold, a reminder that fashion in this world is storytelling in itself. But what caught me off guard was how much the film has on its mind. Beneath the gloss and the one-liners, there is a very real anxiety about the state of media. The consolidation of power, the rise of artificial intelligence, the erosion of traditional journalism. It is all there, woven into the narrative without ever becoming overwhelming. At one point, I could not help but think about the strange place we find ourselves in today. We are living through a time where everything feels increasingly commodified, where attention is currency, and where creativity often finds itself negotiating with algorithms, data, and corporate consolidation. There is a quiet anxiety in that reality, a sense that the soul of art and media is constantly being tested against profitability and scale. The film does not spell any of this out in bold strokes, but it captures that unease in subtle, effective ways. You feel it in the shifting power dynamics, in the conversations about relevance, and in the underlying tension of an industry trying to hold onto its identity. And yet, even with all of that simmering beneath the surface, the film never forgets to be fun. There are some genuinely great one-liners scattered throughout, the kind that remind you why the original became so iconic in the first place. The humor here is a bit more cynical, a bit more reflective of the times, but it still lands. There is also a surprising sweetness to the film, especially in how it approaches its characters. It allows them to grow without losing what made them special. That said, it is not without its flaws. The first act leans a little too heavily into nostalgia, almost winking at the audience in ways that can feel slightly self-aware. There are moments where it feels like the film is trying just a bit too hard to remind you of what you loved about the original. But thankfully, this is mostly contained to the early stretch. Some character journeys feel more fully realized than others. Miranda is given the richest material to work with, while the rest occasionally feel like they are orbiting familiar beats rather than charting entirely new emotional ground. It never pulls you out of the film, but it does create a lingering sense that there was room to dig deeper with a few of these arcs. What ultimately holds everything together is the film's control over tone. It moves comfortably between wit, introspection, and emotional sincerity without losing its footing. There is a confidence in how it juggles these elements, allowing each to breathe without competing for attention. More than anything, this feels like a continuation that understands its own appeal. It invites you back into this world with a sense of ease, trusting that the connection to these characters is already there, while still giving them space to exist in a slightly altered landscape. The result is something that feels both familiar and quietly refreshed. And that is where the film finds its purpose. It finds a reason to return to these characters beyond simple nostalgia. It asks what happens when icons are forced to evolve, when industries transform, and when people who once defined a space must now fight to remain relevant within it. And in doing so, it becomes something more than just a sequel. It becomes a reflection of where we are right now. Funny, stylish, occasionally sobering, and unexpectedly thoughtful, The Devil Wears Prada 2 walks that fine line between comfort and change. It may not redefine the legacy of the original, but it certainly earns its place beside it. Certainly, I'm not in the target demo for The Devil Wears Prada 2. I don't especially care for couture and the glamorous world of high fashion. The original 2006 movie isn't something I hold in much regard, and if you were to watch it now, it's like it came from a different planet where fashion magazines ruled and those who covered the scene were adjacent to an elite society most of us could only dream of. The sequel, which brings back all of the principal characters, easily could have been a simple nostalgia piece that gave fans more of what they loved. That's definitely what I expected it to be. But credit to everyone involved, it's actually quite a bit more insightful than that, and recognizes that the world is a very different place, people are struggling, journalism is fighting for survival, and culture magazines such as Runway are needing to evolve, as does its infamously prickly leader, Miranda Priestley. Meryl Streep returns as the iconic Miranda, the Anna Wintour-esque director or Runway fashion magazine. She's even more of an old battle axe than before, but times have changed. Her position is no longer as assured as it once was. Magazine sales have slipped, things have gone digital, and Miranda has to look over her shoulder not to receive any HR violations for her contemptuous treatment of staffers. She's managed to hold on to her job thanks to the support of magazine chairman IRV Ravitz, Tibor Feldman, but finds that position tenuous when she runs a glowing feature on a clothing brand that covertly runs sweatshops. With Runway on the verge of collapse, IRV hires Miranda's former assistant, Andy, played again by Anne Hathaway, to come in as the new features editor where she can help clean up its public image. Andy is in a different place than she was 20 years ago. She left fashion and got into hard journalism, writing stories that mattered but nobody read. On the same day she and her team win an award for their work, they are all unceremoniously laid off by text. So her acceptance speech turns into a rant against those billionaires who have turned journalism into a for-profit industry, with the hard-working reporters and staff seen as just numbers on a balance sheet. She goes viral for this screed, and it makes her the perfect voice to help rebrand Runway. Of course, this puts her at odds with Miranda, who barely seems to remember Andy at all. But when IRV is suddenly out of the picture and his Bezos-esque son begins tearing down everything that made Runway great, Andy and Miranda will have to figure out a way to work together if the magazine is to survive. While The Devil Wears Prada 2 is smarter and more enjoyable than it has any right to be, it's also less whimsical and funny. That said, those who come for the amazing outfits worn by outrageously beautiful people in exotic locales will have plenty to enjoy. The one who seems to be enjoying it the most is Stanley Tucci as the lovably droll Nigel, always the best dressed guy in any room. He's still there dispensing sage, if somewhat acidic, advice to Andy, and of course, standing by Miranda's side through thick and thin. We also see the return of Emily Bunt as Emily Charlton, Miranda's icy former assistant and Andy's rival, who has taken over as a senior exec at Dior and is soon to marry Benji, a lame billionaire bro played by Justin Theroux. Somehow, they managed to turn Theroux, once strapping and charismatic, into a clone of Leisure Suit Larry. The transformation is jarring, to say the least. Actually, other than Nigel, the men in this movie are incredibly lame. For some reason, all of these powerful, brilliant, and beautiful women are attracted to diffuses. It's like watching an episode of The King of Queens. Andy forms an unexpected relationship with Peter, a cheery Australian contractor punching way above his weight. The script does him no favors in painting him as a simp. When Andy, fresh off a rough day at work, lashes out at him in a very Miranda-esque way, he slinks away and practically begs for her to stay in his life. Lucy Liu also has a small role as Sasha Barnes, Benji's ex-wife who has become a cultural icon for rebuilding herself after leaving that loser behind. Kenneth Branagh has a small role as Miranda's husband, a violinist with a sensitive soul, but he doesn't have much to do but be a sounding board for her. With cameos by Donatella Versace, Lady Gaga, Heidi Klum, and an extensive trip to Dolce & Gabbana's Milan Fashion Week, the film is like entering a world of extravagance that is reserved for the elite of the elite. However, Aline Brosh McKenna's screenplay recognizes that, even amongst them, these fashionistas are at the whim of the billionaires who fund them, and it can all go away with the stroke of a pen if it means saving money or earning greater profits. Look at what someone like Jeff Bezos has done to the Washington Post. He bought this massive journalistic institution and has stripped it down to the bare bones. They still do journalism there, somewhat, but is hardly the force it once was. Stuff like that is happening all over the world, not just here. Hathaway, Streep, Blunt, and Tucci all slip back into their roles gracefully, almost like they never left them. In almost every case it's also like they haven't aged a day, a fact that should make us all jealous. A decision to smooth out Miranda's rough edges to make her more sympathetic doesn't feel true to the character, but it's balanced by Andy who remains hopeful, ambitious, and yet realistic about the profession she has chosen. The same can be said about The Devil Wears Prada too, an indulgent but honest look at those who live a life of luxury that can go out of fashion at any moment. If you're new here, and stumbled upon this blog through the mythical powers of the internet, welcome. I know a lot of visitors to my website are people who randomly come upon this website through search engines like Google, but I also do have a lot of visitors who come back. Regardless, my name is Ashley, and I started this blog in order to keep track of everything I'm coming across in the world. I recently started an 8-to-5 job and have been trying to reclaim my sanity and hobbies by finding fun things to do on the weekends and after work, and one of my saving graces truly has been my AMC A-List subscription. I've always had one on and off throughout graduate school, and I recently reclaimed my subscription after a brief stint of thinking I was going to move to India. Long story. Sometimes the movies I really want to see aren't included on AMC A-List, which is sad, but I accept the reality of the situation. I get a ton of use out of this subscription despite that. On a slightly different note though, I used to work professionally as a film critic, which is very much a dying career, and when I would go to the film festivals I watched everything that really excited me. A list is also an opportunity for me to go outside of my comfort zone. Recently, at the time of typing this, I've seen a handful of movies I don't think I would have ever seen if I had to actually pay for them. I see so many movies throughout different states on a list that I basically make money off of AMC, rather than spending money. I have an entire spreadsheet for it. I'd been waiting for The Devil Wears Prada 2 to come out ever since it was announced, and when my sister and I got the chance, we ventured to an AMC theater in the area to catch a screening. It was packed, which wasn't entirely unexpected considering the popularity of the first movie. The movie starts 20 years after the events of the first movie, so it takes place in 2026, and Andy, a successful journalist who's traveled the world in search of good stories, finds her team and she laid off due to restructuring in the middle of an award ceremony. That same day, Miranda Priestley comes under fire because Runway, the magazine she runs, ran an article about a brand that utilizes sweatshop labor. Andy's speech about journalism still mattering at the award ceremony is sent to IRV Ravitz, the owner of the parent company, and he hires Andy to be the features editor of the magazine. Her friend offers to give her a 6-figure book deal if she writes a tell-all about Miranda, which she considers. He doesn't tell Miranda though, and when Andy rolls up to work the next day, Miranda is rightfully angered at what's happened. Miranda also acts like she has no idea who Andy is, then drags Nigel and her to a meeting with an angry advertiser, Dior. Turns out Andy's former co-worker, Emily, works there now and wants to take advantage of the situation to get Dior more ad space. Runway has been publishing a lot of clickbait and sloppy material, and it's Andy's job to now turn that around. One of the interviews she does is with Emily about the new Dior flagship, which leads to an argument about how high fashion is increasingly becoming unaffordable. Andy's articles are all good, but lacking the metrics she needs, forcing her to land an interview with Sacha Barnes. At the same time, while she tours a luxury apartment, she falls for a handsome Australian man who happened to design it. There's some friction between the two later on in the movie, but we do love a happy moment for Andy in terms of the romance department. Back to Sacha, she is the ex-wife of a Silicon Valley billionaire and now an owner of a large portion of his money, and she happens to like both Miranda and Andy. She gives them a scoop about her engagement, leading to massive success for Runway. IRV then sets Miranda up to be the next head of content across the entire parent company, but at his 75th birthday he has a heart attack and leaves the company to his son Jay. Jay ends up hiring McKinsey consultants to figure out how to fix the money situation, and everyone is shocked when Miranda just puts up with his suggestions to cut everything back, including Andy and Nigel's departments. Andy is very conflicted about what's happening and insults her new beau, leading him to walk out on her. She flies out with the crew to Milan Fashion Week, where Nigel throws a gala runway event. Andy conspires with Emily, who is now dating the Silicon Valley billionaire, to save Runway, leading to the billionaire proposing to Jay that he will buy it. But when they reveal the plan to Miranda, she throws it in their face because she knows Emily wants to take over Runway. Andy is horrified and doesn't believe it at first, but Emily confesses under pressure. Turns out Miranda kicked her out of Runway due to a lack of vision creatively. The dinner they planned kicks off, and Miranda is horrified after she talks to Benji and he reveals his vision for fashion is all AI. The next morning, Miranda shows up to Andy's door and tells her to find a buyer. She calls around as Miranda goes to shows, and right before their own gala starts, Andy gets Sacha to agree to buying all of Elias Clark. Miranda lets Nigel give the speech for the gala so she can go to Sacha and finish the deal, getting her promotion at last. Miranda also tells Andy she knows about the book deal and tells her to go through with it. Andy makes up with her Australian beau and then Emily, who tells her all those years ago she wanted to be friends with Andy. Nigel also tells Andy that he was the one who got her hired back at Runway, and the film ends with them working together to keep Runway alive. While this wasn't as good as the first movie, this follow-up hits pretty well. I think it's hard to beat the original in this case, but I like seeing these characters 20 years later and with a new set of characters as well. I adored Simone Ashley's outfits throughout the course of the film, and squealed when I saw Helen J. Shen in this movie. This movie also brought a round of nostalgia for me. I saw the original many years ago, and now I'm 25. I went to fashion school in New York City for my college years, FIT, and I remember the whirlwind of Fashion Week and touring all of the showrooms as a part of my coursework. This movie really does bring to life that world, and so did its predecessor. It's not the best movie in the world, but it hits as a movie. The dialogue works, the storyline is predictable but well executed, and there's plenty of eye candy in terms of the actual outfits we see on the screen. In a key scene from The Devil Wears Prada 2, Meryl Streep's Miranda Priestley gently asks Stanley Tucci's Nigel if she's been taking advantage of him for the past 20 years. The scene is played as if it comes from a genuine place, seemingly intended to make viewers say ah as Miranda finally recognizes her second-in-command's skill and dedication to the magazine. Unfortunately, the scene falls flat on its face because seemingly everyone involved with Prada 2 forgot that the first movie ended with Miranda purposefully screwing Nigel out of a promotion he deserved to secure the future of her own career. It's a key moment that leads Anne Hathaway's Andy Sachs to leave the magazine and Miranda behind, vowing not to become that kind of person. But that kind of person no longer exists in The Devil Wears Prada 2. There is no devil here, only an aimless, mischaracterized shell of a once interesting character. When trailers for the film dropped, some fans questioned why Miranda seemingly couldn't remember her history with Andy and Emily Blunt's Emily Charlton, going so far as to wonder if she had dementia. Those concerns were laughable to me. Obviously, Miranda just didn't care about her assistants and was being her usual thorny self. Sadly, it turns out those fans were right. Not about the dementia, but about Miranda being nothing like her former self. In fact, the entirety of Prada 2 is as aimless and meandering as Miranda's character has become. There's a weak and uninteresting plot, no real character development, and barely even any fashion but plenty of nostalgia bait. The film runs just under 2 hours long yet somehow feels like it's pushing 3, moving from scene to scene with no sense of purpose or reason. It's a disappointing result for a highly anticipated sequel to a popular film, but at least Lady Gaga gets to take the stage for an electrifying fashion show that's unfortunately just as random and meaningless as anything else in this film. None of our main characters even bother to watch it. The one pleasant surprise about The Devil Wears Prada 2 lies in its exploration of journalism's importance in a changing world that only cares about social media clicks and using AI to suck the creative soul out of art. Andy and her entire team of journalists suddenly lose their jobs due to budget cuts, leading her to be rehired at Runway as their new features editor. Andy tries her best to steer Runway and Miranda out of a PR crisis, writing thought-provoking pieces that no one reads. Focusing the entire film on that storyline may have resulted in something more entertaining, but halfway through it switches to another rote business takeover plot. This time, the new owner of Runway's parent company tries to do a corporate restructuring and threaten Miranda's livelihood. There's another side plot focusing on Andy writing a tell-all book about Miranda, a reference to how the original The Devil Wears Prada book was written. This would have also been a more interesting storyline to follow, but it peters out weakly. Instead of drawing you in with an engaging story, the film seems more concerned with making you remember how much you liked the first one. Remember those jokes? Remember when this character did that? Remember that outfit? It gets to a point where even if you don't remember something, you can tell some kind of reference is being made because they're so obvious. It's like Prada 2 just wants to replay the hits of the first film. Miranda's job is in trouble, Andy is desperately trying to save her, and Nigel is hardworking but overlooked. Somehow none of these dynamics have evolved in 20 years, to the point where Andy's desperation to help Miranda just seems sad for a 40-something-year-old woman who has her own life and career to worry about. Emily is the only character who seems to have changed over the years, perhaps because Emily Blunt is the only actor putting in a real effort. Stanley Tucci is decent as well, but Hathaway and Streep's performances are shockingly phoned in. Blunt seems to be the only person who's considered how their character evolved after the events of the first film, and it shows in her performance. Hathaway and Andy just seem happy to be here at all, albeit bogged down with an uninteresting romance plot that's been shoved in for no reason. Meanwhile, Meryl Streep seems as uninterested in being in this movie as Miranda is in speaking to Andy. Miranda is uncharacteristically passive. Sure, it's been 20 years, and her reign of terror has been ended by numerous HR complaints, but Miranda doesn't take any action at all. She simply floats about, buffeted by winds created by other characters. She has one good scene with Emily and several funny jokes, but no character development or real purpose in this story. Simone Ashley looks fantastic as Miranda's new right-hand woman, but she and the other assistant, played by Caleb Heron, have no story either. Andy's assistant Jin Chao, played by Helen J. Shen, at least gets something small to do. Lady Gaga has a cameo as herself in one of the best scenes in the film, performing her excellent new song Shape of a Woman at Milan Fashion Week. The scene is electrifying and Gaga's performance is incredible, but what could have been a stunning third-act set piece becomes a 1.5-minute music video as half of the main characters drive away from the fashion show as quickly as possible. There's plenty of other celebrity cameos and some great outfits, but The Devil Wears Prada 2 is much more interested in nostalgia bait than telling an entertaining story. It deserves recognition for shining a light on the importance of true journalism and human creativity, but the movie isn't truly about these topics. They're more of a backdrop for the meandering parade of characters moving aimlessly from scene to scene. Unfortunately, even The Devil Wears Prada can't escape the hell of weakly written, poorly paced nostalgia bait sequels / reboots / spin-offs that are starting to define the 2020s. But The Devil Wears Prada 2 lets us pretend, anyway, even as it starts with a harsh bit of reality, seconds before Anne Hathaway wins an award for her journalism. She and her colleagues at the New York Vanguard receive a text telling them they're all fired. Her sudden availability winds up being perfect timing. Runway just published a story lauding a fast fashion company that turns out to be using sweatshop labor, and CEO Ira, Tibor Feldman, and his son B.J. Novak, decide that installing Andy as the magazine's new features editor will save the venerable publication's credibility. Trouble is, they didn't run this past Miranda Priestly, Meryl Streep, first, so Andy's reunion with her old boss is already off on the wrong foot, even with ever-patient art director Stanley Tucci, once again providing Andy with the latest designer togs and shoes. After an ass-kissing visit with Emily Blunt, once Miranda's second-in-command, now a higher-up at Dior, a major advertiser with Runway, Andy sets off to put real journalism into the magazine, even as market forces and an untrustworthy tech giant, Justin Theroux, try to bring down the whole enterprise. Screenwriter Aline Brosh McKenna and director David Frankel, in returning to this material, had no easy choices. They either had to pretend that all was well in the world of glossy mags, or they'd have to give us a Miranda and an Andy struggling with the fact that, as Miranda puts it, the September issue is so thin you could floss with it. But the ongoing appeal of the original The Devil Wears Prada had nothing to do with real-world concerns. It was a triumph of the underdog in Chanel boots' tale so ephemeral that you could floss with it. This grim examination of corporate consolidation brought to you by 20th Century Studios, once known as 20th Century Fox before it was absorbed into the Walt Disney Company. Seeing the once formidable Miranda having to cope with HR demands would be funnier if the movie wasn't constantly softening her blunt edges, to the extent of giving Kenneth Branagh the thankless role of her devoted husband, presented only to show that an older, wiser Miranda can keep a man. Production designer Jess Gonker, Saturday Night, wisely gives us a suite of runway offices that seem less grand and spacious, implying both the shrinking of the market and that feeling you get when you return to your first-grade classroom and everything suddenly seems so small. Alas, the original movie's wicked wit has shrunk as well. The delicious venom that Streep and Blunt portrayed in the first film, unavoidably softened by repeat watchings over the decades, lives on via Bridgerton Simone Ashley, as Miranda's current, ever unamused assistant. Andy gets her own barely there relationship, with a sweet contractor played by Patrick Bramall, Colin from Accounts, but in true sequel style, The Devil Wears Prada 2 exists to give you moments, or outfits, that remind you of the first movie. Sequels have succeeded with less, goodness knows, but too often there's a sense of inertia that drags down the pace. Little subplots get raised and resolved with minimal excitement, and there's an ongoing sense that any attempt to revive and revitalize Runway amounts to rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. The first movie, for all its fluff, gave Miranda that eminently quotable cerulean sweater monologue, but this follow-up has nothing as interesting to say about fashion, or journalism, or life as anyone leads it. It's sending nostalgia down the runway and expecting us to wear it, when the perfectly comfortable original already fits just right. Starring Meryl Streep, Anne Hathaway, Emily Blunt, Stanley Tucci, Kenneth Branagh, Simone Ashley, Justin Theroux, Lucy Liu, Tracy Toms, Tibor Feldman, B.J. Novak, Patrick Bramall, Caleb Heron, Helen J. Shen, Rachel Bloom, Pauline Calumet, Conrad Ricamora, Lady Gaga, Kennedy Walsh, Sierra, Mark Jacobs, Callum Harper, Ashley Graham. As Miranda Priestley nears retirement, she reunites with Andy Sachs to face off against her former assistant turned rival, Emily Charlton. It might have moved at a glacial pace, but the sequel to The Devil Wears Prada has arrived with Anne Hathaway and Meryl Streep returning to their iconic roles. The film is a nice return to the world of high fashion and how Andy and Miranda have changed in the industry's shift to digital and social media. For a sequel made 20 years after the original, The Devil Wears Prada 2 answers pretty quickly why it is worthwhile with its cast and clever writing and humor for this trip around the runway. Hathaway's Andy is now a successful journalist who finds herself out of a job thanks to dwindling interest in journalism and corporate conglomerates downsizing across the board. Opportunity knocks when she is offered a job heading editorial for Runway, which finds itself in crisis after a major controversy. Reunited with her devilish no-nonsense boss, Andy and Miranda have to navigate the changing times to keep Runway alive and successful. It is clear Hathaway and Streep are having a ton of fun, making it seem as if 20 years did not go by between the original and its sequel. They both slip back into their roles easily and the chemistry between them is one of the highlights. Hathaway's portrayal of Andy retains the character's cheery demeanor but shows how much wiser and passionate she's gotten, making fans relate to her in a new way as Andy's desire to keep Runway's traditions and write worthwhile articles instead of puff pieces and videos people don't even read and watch for longer than 5 seconds, one of the central themes of the story. Streep once again humanizes the cold and harsh boss lady of Miranda Priestley as the industry changes too fast for her to follow, delivering Miranda's dry wit and charm alongside her panic at Runway's precarious situation. It is an interesting parallel between the two as they face the existential dread of their careers while disagreeing on the ways to stay relevant and retaining their art. It of course wouldn't be Devil Wears Prada without Emily Blunt and Stanley Tucci, who also return as Emily and Nigel. Much like Streep, Blunt brings her own sense of wit to Emily's sarcasm and newfound sense of superiority as Miranda has to stay in the good graces of Emily and the brand she represents. The film could have used a bit more of Blunt and she is underutilized for the first half, but the latter half finds more to explore of Emily's position and her relationships that offers interesting insight. Tucci's Nigel is still as magnetic as in the original with his own dry humor, sharing great scenes with Hathaway and providing some of the film's more emotional moments as Nigel's long friendship with Miranda is explored. The 4 core cast members click incredibly well, finding new ways to dig into their characters that doesn't feel like retreading what was in the first film. There are plenty of new characters that make their marks, such as Bridgerton Simone Ashley as Miranda's latest assistant, Patrick Bramall as Andy's new boyfriend, Kenneth Branagh as Miranda's boyfriend and Justin Theroux as Emily's brilliant but dumb boyfriend. Hathaway and Bramall's chemistry is great as their budding relationship feels very natural and believable. The writing in their first date is clever and funny as Hathaway and Bramall bounce off each other while Branagh allows Miranda to be more vulnerable, letting us see a side of her she rarely lets Andy or Nigel see. He is also more of the straight man in the film, commenting on the excessive lavishness of a party or Andy's bravery to bother Miranda in one of her moods. Ashley serves as a balance to Miranda's mean streak, reminding her she can't say certain things in today's work culture while also being over the top about fashion and how the wealthy view lower classes. Theroux adds some levity as a rich and rather clueless tech bro, but it does wear thin fairly quickly as his dim-wittedness stretches credibility, though with the tech brothers currently populating headlines and the world, this may be more scarily accurate than we'd care to admit, but his role-saving grace is a great scene with Streep where he lays out the nihilistic argument against what Miranda and Andy are trying to preserve. That itself is one of the central themes to Devil Wears Prada 2 as the story tackles how obsolete the magazine and news industry has become. Processes and formats change so incredibly fast it is hard to keep up with, forcing Miranda and Andy to find ways to keep afloat in an ever-changing landscape. The film has a slight backdrop of criticism against the ultra-wealthy and snobbish people like Miranda and her colleagues who look down on the middle and lower classes, but the film doesn't go quite as far with either theme as it could, painting Miranda in a more sympathetic light than the first one did. It is still entertaining and fun to see Hathaway, Streep, Blunt, and Tucci together again with plenty of cameos from the fashion world and justifies the need for a sequel, but the story is basic and the message isn't pushed as strongly as it could or should. The Devil Wears Prada 2 is a welcome return to Runway with the cast's chemistry its biggest selling point. Hathaway and Streep captivate every scene they are in, finding new ways to explore Andy and Miranda 2 decades later with a humorous script. The story could have done a bit more with its themes of the loss of art and creativity for a quick buck or 30 seconds of exposure on whatever social media is the latest craze, but fans of the original will still find plenty to enjoy in this film. Regarding The Devil Wears Prada 2, my answers are, in order, no. Also no. Not really. And yes. The original The Devil Wears Prada, which came out in 2006 and followed the adventures of the hopelessly unstylish, at first, young journalist Andy Sachs, Anne Hathaway, facing off against the formidable Anna Wintour proxy, Runway magazine editor Miranda Priestley, Meryl Streep, has turned into one of the quintessential comfort films. It's the kind of film you can watch over and over again and probably recite some parts by heart. It's aspirational in a variety of ways, a young woman finding her voice. A formidable woman softening a bit, while demonstrating why she's so formidable. A snooty but loving gunkle, everyone's favorite heterosexual gay man, Stanley Tucci. An arch-nemesis turned reluctant ally, Emily Blunt. And fashion, all that glorious fashion. Much has happened in the ensuing 20 years. Everyone agrees that Andy's boyfriend, Adrian Grenier, who doesn't appear in the sequel, was a dud. Miranda Priestley's cerulean blue monologue, this film's answer to A Few Good Men's You Can't Handle the Truth, has gone viral. Oh, and print media is, let's just say, not the powerhouse it used to be. As the sequel starts, Andy is an award-winning investigative journalist whose newspaper has just folded. Meanwhile, Miranda has a crisis of her own. She wrote glowingly about a fashion brand that was revealed to use sweatshops and is now the subject of memes that vilify her, depicting her with a Pinocchio nose or dressed as a fast food worker with a speech bubble that reads, "You want lies with that?" Films notoriously have a hard time replicating meme culture. Somehow, Andy is hired to be a feature writer at Runway magazine in the hopes that her famous journalistic integrity will send the right message to readers. When Andy bounds into Miranda's office on her first day back at Runway, she's excited to finally be on the same footing as her old boss. Indeed, she assumes that it was Miranda who put in the good word for her. Instead, Miranda turns to Tucci's Nigel and says, "Who is this? Do I know her?" It's a funny, albeit lazy joke. And just for a second, all of Andy's poise and confidence is out of the door. Briefly, she's that gawky college grad wearing Marshall's sweater sets. Part of the fun of the original was witnessing Andy's makeover, but in this film, she's fabulous from the jump, dressed in fitted blazers, oversized sunglasses, and stiletto heels. Nigel quips, "Oh, look what TJ Maxx dragged in," when he first sees her, but no one's buying it. As mentioned, the dud of a boyfriend is out of the picture, but they give Andy an almost insultingly perfunctory love interest, an architect played by Patrick Bramall. If anyone can explain his overarching role in the film, other than to remind us that Andy is still a catch-do, please let me know. The film's crisis, essentially, is how can they save Runway in a world of venture capitalists who buy up publications just to cut staff, reduce coverage, or worse. If in the original film Runway was all-powerful in its influence, reputation, and glamour, now it's just a little sad. Justin Theroux has a funny turn as Benji Barnes, a Jeff Bezos type who is dating Blunt's Emily. He's depicted as a big nerd who has been given the glam treatment by his stylish new girlfriend, who can't get enough of his money but clearly despises him. All the leads are still in good form both in terms of performance and appearance, they are remarkably well preserved. Streep, in particular, makes great hay of Priestley having to cut back on things. How dare they make Miranda hang up her own coat, Saker Blue, and fly coach, the horror. This is clearly one of those cases where all the famous people were game to do a sequel, so they built a script to make it happen. Although only 2 writers are credited, Aline Brosh McKenna and Lauren Weisberg, it has the distinct feel of having been written by committee. The film is competently directed by David Frankel, who also did the original, although there are a few too many shots of Andy striding quickly through New York traffic for my taste. The Devil Wears Prada 2 is a chance to hang out with our old friends and see some great clothing and little else. For some, that will be enough. Am I wearing the Support Media Journalism pin from Chanel? Yes, I am, and so is the Devil Wears Prada 2. Wearing it, flaunting it, and hoping it starts a trend with it. The O.G team in director David Frankel and writer Aline Brosh McKenna reunite the original cast after a 20-year gap and dish out something beyond just a damn good sequel. It weaponizes the iconography and your love for the 2006 cult classic to make a valiant statement about the weight of local publications in real time. It's the last thing I expected from a studio summer tentpole dramedy to do this. I had to pull an "Is this fucking play about us?" because it's a thorough, satirical reflection of modern journalism's near-dystopian rapid deterioration, publications gasping for air in a suffocating media landscape. If nobody got us, The Devil Wears Prada 2 got us. Moreover, it is a fantastic sequel, recaptures the predecessor's spirit with its own charm and elegance. At least whenever it doesn't have high reverence about its own past. In 2026, Andrea Sachs, Anne Hathaway, is a thriving investigative journalist. Just as she's about to receive an award at a ceremony, she learns via company-wide email that she and all her fellow writers have been laid off. Ah, pain. Meanwhile, Miranda Priestley, Meryl Streep, faces a PR nightmare at Runway, and Condé Nast-like parent company Elias Clark chairman IRV Ravitz, Tibor Feldman, plus his vest-wearing, tech bro Sanjay, BJ Novak, scramble for a solution. Enter Andy, hired to run Runway's new features department, unbeknownst to Miranda and Nigel, Stanley Tucci. She tries to reshape the pub, wooing ad buyers, crossing paths with now Dior executive Emily Blunt, and attempting to score an interview with elusive entrepreneur Sasha Barnes, Lucy Liu, all while trying to do something right and still seeking Miranda's approval. But as unforeseen forces arise, Miranda, Nigel, and Andy must keep Runway afloat and out of the hands of tech undertakers. Like Cinderella 20 years after her happily ever after, stepping into her glass slipper and going, "I'm still that bitch," Prada 2's returning ensemble seamlessly fits back into their roles, as if no time has passed since 2006. Streep is still iconic as Miranda, elusive, yet grounded in humanity. Tucci is the king of straight playing gay, returning to form as Nigel. Blunt's Emily, who bears more emotional weight, is still a delight as she is compelling. The new additions, first assistant Amari, Simone Ashley, second assistant Charlie, Caleb Heron, and a hilarious MVP Jin Chao, Helen J. Shen, are fun. Hathaway is a remarkable standout. She conveys Sachs' growth, assured, experienced, while retaining her lawfully good, perky Northwestern nature. In my Mother Mary review, I joked about her Ella-enchanted nostalgia with her fantastic vocals. In Prada 2, her boundless charisma and 2026 glow-up put me in my Princess Diaries nostalgia. Hathaway is one of the most charismatic working actresses of our time. You'll probably hear that sentiment again for the 3 other features she's dropping this year. The Devil Wears Prada 2 focuses on characters navigating the modern digital journalism workspace while updating Runway's in-house culture, and Miranda's progress, well, as much as you'd expect. It's workplace commentary that yields hilarious bits about adapting to contemporary culture, or Miranda being more irritated by it, trying to avoid HR complaints while retaining her cutthroat manner. The film follows a more visible narrative than a character study, but that doesn't disrupt the return to high fashion. The love for fashion is still in its DNA. Molly Rogers' costume design left us gagged. It's so extravagant, it's maddening that it's not on IMAX. Frankel's classic glamour-infused direction across fashion destination sequences and accompanying soundtrack adds to the wonder of the field. something that's rarely seen in modern mid-budget movies. The film's most critical arena is its scathing discussion of today's bleak digital media culture. Whereas the original was a horror story of surviving as an assistant, Prada 2 expands into a horror tale for journalists that hits too close to home. If you have a friend in media journalism, chances are 2025 was brutal: monopolies consolidating, tech bro takeovers, chairmen drooling over AI instead of human articles, shuttered pubs, endless layoffs. If I add one more thing, I'll get violent. I'm one of hundreds of writers trying to survive month to month. Anyway, subscribe to Wendy Reviews. It felt like we were in an invisible dome, drowning just to get readers to care about cultural purveyors. McKenna seems as pissed as we are. It's blood boiling yet so authentic. Man, if this movie had been in production a little longer, they might have added a snide remark about every writer ending up on Substack these days. This has a visceral effect on Miranda and Zach's newfound dynamic. There's a tense uneasiness as the person Andy once feared and helped self-actualize her in her strive to impress and gets rolled over, emasculated by finance men of little IQ but an eye for profit. The casting of Novak and Justin Theroux was insanely effective, with the latter playing Benji Barnes, Sasha's former fat kid loser turned billionaire ex-husband, whom Emily shacks up with. Despite being so comical in his incompetence, he satirizes your modern tech geniuses looking for profit with an uncaring, narrow mindset, making the film's commentary powerful in a later scene with Priestley. With its media commentary, Prada 2 sacrifices, or gambles, some of the novelty that made the original a cult classic. But for a highly anticipated summer tentpole blockbuster to discuss today's crucial reality in such a bold, cutting fashion makes me respect it immensely, especially compared to other recent sequels that only play greatest hits. Mind you, this film does that too, from the opening frame of Sax wiping steam from her bathroom mirror to visual callbacks and remixes across its whole story. Nevertheless, it plays as a dire time capsule that remains entertaining. McKenna's aversion to digital's uprising is loud in a subtle way, bringing back rare tropes like Andy starting a relationship with a charming Aussie builder, Patrick Bramall, via a legit, heartwarming meet cute. That's truer nostalgia than any self-reference the film throws at you. For a movie about runway going digital to accommodate the average reader, it's overly promotional material, including a real runway magazine I picked up at an NYC pop-up, penned by real writers, adds so much depth to the story. Despite the accuracy of our digital media landscape, Prada 2 finds itself in a precarious spot. It doesn't have all the answers on how to stop the collapse, and at times, its thematic through line gets tangled. The resolution works well enough for the movie's story, but the grounded satire and heavy opening hook made me wish it went further. The film presents a motif around the hard-working journalists who run runway. Yet, like many legacy follow UPS, it gets too high on its own sequel supply, undercutting its potential to bring its message home, remixing the original's beats with a new coat of paint several times. You've heard about the editing cuts, from Sydney Sweeney getting removed, faint oh, no, to someone I know who was credited and had her scene cut. Though most of the runtime flows well, the faltering bits of not knowing how to wrap up the story rear their head toward the epilogue. It concludes with an endless string of gift-wrapping bows that lack structural cohesion, prioritizing fan service, Hallmark card closure rather than a tight high note. If you go into The Devil Wears Prada 2 looking for fierce fashion porn, bitcha put-downs and a fresh dose of Meryl Streep's iconic performance as imperious Anna Wintour clone Miranda Priestley, you are unlikely to be disappointed. Arriving 20 years after the original, David Frankel's sequel hits familiar beats that fans will eat up and deftly reconfigures the core trio of women into new adversarial positions, even if it ultimately lapses into cozy sentimentality. The movie is best when it sticks to fluffy, fun nostalgia rather than shooting for substance. Detractors immune to the cult-like adoration for the high-sheen original had issues with its shallowness, toothless fashion industry satire and anemic storyline. It's hard to skewer aspirational luxury when you're drooling over it. The late series Sex and the City vibe, The canonical HBO show was a stepping stone for Frankel when he was cutting his teeth as a director. That made the material seem already dated 2 decades back is even more nagging here, not that the huge fan base who just want the glamour and romance are going to care. Returning screenwriter Aline Brosh McKenna aims for relevancy this time by padding the story with quasi-topical points. The sharpest of them is a close-to-the-bone commentary on the death of journalism, in both news media and ad-depleted fash mags. Disney, among other studios, is helping to dig that grave by adopting the now almost standard strategy of keeping critics gagged until pants-wetting influencers have shaped the narrative on social media. Then there's the introduction of tech billionaire Benji Barnes, Justin Theroux, who's basically Jeff Bezos with hair. Having extricated himself from his first marriage to the now stonking rich Sasha, Lucy Liu, he attempts to buy the film's Vogue stand-in, Runway, as a toy for his calculating new girlfriend, whose identity we won't disclose. But in true American oligarchy spirit, he sees no value in media in a world coasting toward extinction and instead is looking for a new planet to ravage. This thread is barely a comedy sketch. Even thinner is a potentially timely dig at the luxury real estate boom, a legitimate issue in New York City in the grip of a housing crisis. Former assistant to Miranda, Andy Sachs, and Hathaway, lobs some sanctimonious indignation at her half-baked new love interest, Australian architect Patrick Bram-Mall, a suave Pierce Brosnan type who designed a new high-end apartment block. But through some kind of illogical plot contortion, she is soon living there, at which point you might ask, wait, girl, what was that objection about ripping out heritage buildings and replacing them with rich people pads again? Maybe she was persuaded because her old friend Lily, Tracy Toms, declared it time for her to get a grown-up apartment? Remind me, are we critiquing conspicuous displays of wealth or endorsing them? You could get whiplash trying to figure out where this movie stands on ostentatious luxury. Tellingly, a twinkly shot of the Manhattan skyline, in real life now blighted by pencil-shaped high-rises, appears to have been digitally scrubbed to preserve the nostalgic glow. What's most noticeable is the absence of 262 Fifth Avenue, the Russian-owned and designed skyscraper that has rankled many New Yorkers by blocking the south view of the Empire State Building. The movie gestures toward the real world but is unequivocally selling the fantasy. Which, again, will be just what the target audience ordered. In the intervening years since we last saw her, Andy has been toiling as a serious journalist at a hard-hitting news outlet called The Vanguard. But just as she's announced as the winner of a journalism award at a fancy dinner, her phone and those of all her colleagues at the table light up with texts informing them that the publication is folding and their employment terminated. Andy's acceptance speech rips into the now sadly familiar story of another media company taking a $500 million write-down while the take-home of its CEO the previous year was $11 million. Her impassioned outpouring, the subtext of which is that journalism is more important than corporate greed, goes viral. Meanwhile, across town, Streep's Miranda makes a regal entrance in a spectacular red gown, oddly like the one from Mother Mary, at a swanky event where Group Chairman IRV Ravitz, Tibor Feldman, giving good SI Newhouse, is expected to announce her move from the now digital runway to global content editor for the parent media company. But just as she hits the red carpet, news breaks that the magazine is under fire for endorsing a fast fashion brand built on sweatshop labor. Having seen Andy's speech online, IRV calls to offer her the position of Runway's new features editor, with a damage control mandate. When she arrives at the office the next day, Miranda has not been informed of the new hire and nor does she remember Andy. The EIC gives her outfit a disapproving once-over before parking her in the crappiest office available, where Andy pens what the New York Times calls a bracing mea culpa about the sweatshop faux pas. Band-aid applied, though unacknowledged by the Ice Queen. There are some amusing updates on what Miranda can get away with. Her coat and handbag are no longer hurled on assistants' desks since an HR complaint. And her hyper-competent first assistant Amari, Simone Ashley, discreetly shuts her down when she risks saying anything culturally insensitive. Not that such concerns take the sting out of her haughty disdain, which Streep reliably delivers with supreme poise and acid tongue. The same could be said for Runway's longtime art director Nigel Kipling, Stanley Tucci, though a tart sweetness, even a whisper of camaraderie cushions his barbs. He's Miranda's confidant but not her imitator. Tucci is the movie's other MVP and gets many of McKenna's best lines. Brilliant at his job, Nigel once again is the story's magical gay, whisking the wardrobe-deficient Andy into the photo shoot fashion closet and kitting her out with thousands of bucks worth of swoon-worthy designer apparel. The other part of restoring Runway's credibility early on is appeasing the advertisers, which means sucking up to Dior, in particular. Miranda's other former assistant, Emily Charlton, Emily Blunt, in delicious form, is now an executive at the legendary fashion house's New York operations. With gloating acerbity, she demands several pages of free ads and a feature on the label's new flagship store. That task also falls to Andy, but Miranda continues to dismiss her worth at the magazine. Andy attempts to change her mind by landing an interview with the press-shy Sacha Barnes, who has been impressed by the new gravitas in Runway's articles. The story's other major development is the ascension to the chairmanship of Irv's fashion Philistin, athleisure outfitted son B.J. Novak. He wears Drakkar Noir, gasps Miranda's second assistant Charlie, Caleb Heron, in horror when the news hits. Jay brings in a team of Ivy League MBA consultants to oversee company restructuring, slashing expense accounts and travel budgets. That thread hands Streep comedy gold as Miranda shudders to learn there's a staff cafeteria in the building where she's expected to eat, and car services are out, meaning Ubers only. One priceless bit is a faint whimper and yearning flutter of her gloved hand toward the business class pods as Amari marches her through to coach on a flight to Milan. Streep's light touch, even with physical comedy like Miranda's struggling with the overheads, is impeccable. Like Paris in the first movie, the Italian fashion capital serves as a glittering backdrop for lots of cool couture and historic landmarks, like the beautiful Galleria Vittorio Emanuele II, home of the original Prada store. Molly Rogers steps in for her mentor Patricia Field as costume designer. Or shopper. Runway is staging a major Milan fashion show for which Miranda reluctantly calls in a favor to enlist a superstar guest. That big name is no longer a secret, but we'll omit it in case someone hasn't heard. That one scene and one song star appearance is the flashiest example of the movie's many celeb cameos, as liberally sprinkled as the routine needle drops. Every time there's an event, faces from the fashion, media, and entertainment worlds mingle with extras, among them Tina Brown, Marc Jacobs, Naomi Campbell, LaRoche, Kara Swisher, Jon Batiste, and Brunello Cucinelli. I gave up trying to scribble the names down fast enough. The best of these appearances is a very funny scene in which Emily lunches with Donatella Versace. There's a bunch of behind-the-scenes intrigue involving Andy, Emily, and Miranda in Milan as the future of Runway and its ownership hangs in the balance and what appear to be betrayals turn into rescue attempts. McKenna's script has no big surprises up its sleeve. Another moment of reflection in the backseat of a car for Miranda, a humbling for Emily, an offer of friendship and I guess some kind of journey for Andy, who's now more confident though still too nice to match the value of Miranda or Emily or Nigel. That said, Hathaway is effortlessly charming in the role. The most affecting note is the melancholy conclusion that any save employed to buoy magazines like Runway will be temporary at best. All four leads step back into their characters' shoes with ease and swan around in fabulous looks. I confess I stalked Nigel's chocolate velvet shawl collar tux jacket online, waiting for a markdown. Grr. But would Miranda really wear that bonkers Dries Van Noten tassel jacket, which was giving me Carol Burnett as Scarlett O'Hara? I'm not convinced. In the end, the movie is less a workplace comedy than a clothes horse, elevated by a classy cast. Of the newcomers, Theroux is playing a caricature and Kenneth Branagh's role as Miranda's supportive violinist husband is only slightly less thankless than Bramall's. Brit Girton alumna Ashley is a zesty addition, Amari's aloof efficiency making her a Miranda in training. Despite talk in an editorial meeting of body positivity and plus-size models on the Milan catwalk, that flag seems to be flown solely by Heron's sweet and amenable Charlie. A promo clip stirred backlash from some East Asians offended by the perceived stereotype of Andy's assistant Jin Chao, academic overachiever, tech-savvy, socially awkward, nerdy fashion sense. Whether that will hurt the film in some markets is hard to say. In any case, it's no fault of appealing Broadway recruit Helen J. Shen in the role. In truth, it's difficult to imagine anyone being terribly upset by anything in The Devil Wears Prada 2. It's pretty and polished, and as featherweight as a fawning magazine puff piece, it will doubtless make a fortune. The Devil Wears Prada 2 opens like a knockoff of itself, with sight gags calling back to the mean quips in the 2006 hit, near-identical teal belts, a gala hailing the less-than-innovative theme spring florals, and a red carpet that's actually cerulean. Those belts, if you'll remember, were the trigger for Meryl Streep's Oscar-nominated speech about how her imperious fashion magazine editor-in-chief Miranda Priestley creates trends that trickle down to the rest of us rabble. That first film, I'll go ahead and anoint it a classic, followed a dowdy college graduate, Anne Hathaway, pursuing a low-level position at runway magazine Vogue in everything but name as a bridge to a serious reporting career. "Whoa," said Bridges, guarded by three trolls, fellow assistant Emily Blunt, tastemaker Nigel, Stanley Tucci, and the devil herself, Streep's silver-haired Miranda, whose saintly last name is an ironic joke. Miranda is a riff on Vogue's former editor-in-chief Anna Wintour, who used to be irritated by her caricature but eventually came around. After all, she's getting played by Meryl freaking Streep. The setting was glam, the struggle relatable. Andy's transition from sensible boots to stilettos served as a metaphor for the effort, even discomfort, it takes to chase your dreams, however they might evolve. The Devil Wears Prada gets celebrated for her makeover, with even Andy's clueless boyfriend, played by Adrian Grenier, accusing her of caring about her runway job solely for the shoes. No, it was never about the shoes. It was about respecting the workaholic she saw in the mirror. The sequel, from returning director David Frankel and screenwriter Aline Brosh McKenna, doesn't find its own footing until it acknowledges that a Cinderella story about making it in journalism no longer fits. Gone are the days when Miranda and Nigel could casually tell their deep-pocketed publisher IRV, Tibor Feldman, that they're junking a $300,000 photo shoot because it failed to reach their lofty standards. Likewise, Andy's story starts when a magnate shutters her current job at a newspaper called the New York Vanguard, firing her and her colleagues for a $500 million tax write-off. Cue the workers of at least one major Hollywood studio nodding in recognition. Hathaway's Andy, smart and likable as ever, returns to a budget-slashed runway as the features editor in charge of investigative pieces that online metrics reveal nobody reads, that is, until she breaks a celebrity engagement. Meanwhile, the internet has reduced Miranda to a meme. Her most recent viral scandal has gotten her animated into that Homer Simpson in a hedge gif. McKenna writes Miranda a self-aware scene where she acknowledges that her harsh reputation boosts her clout. Yet I wonder what Wintour will make of this diminished avatar pursuing the same promotion that she herself just claimed at Condé Nast as global head of content. After elevating custom couture to an art form, just the word content sounds like a demotion. Content is to prestige journalism what Shine is to Chanel. 20 years later, all of the money and power in publishing has been siphoned to the very, very rich. There seem to be as many billionaires in the script for The Devil Wears Prada 2 as magazine assistants. Mighty Miranda must kowtow to the luxury brands and their ambassadors, whose sponsorship keeps runway strutting, including the once harried and humiliated Emily, who is now an executive at Dior. The tension is thicker than mink. The film franchise chooses to ignore original author Lauren Weisberger's own 2013 follow-up novel Revenge Wears Prada, although I'd love to see a threequel that follows her lead and gives Blunt's hilariously frosty Emily the center stage as she does in her third book, When Life Gives You Lululemons. The storytelling is wonky, given the film's competing needs to be Miranda blunt about the modern magazine business while pairing marvelously with a glass of rose. Instead of Paris, we're now whisked to cameo-studded shindigs in the Hamptons and Milan, including a dinner party underneath Da Vinci's mural of The Last Supper. Not only is the painting's topic apropos, Da Vinci himself butted heads with his wealthy patrons. Much of the first half feels like we're cooling our heels with the gang, waiting for a plot to start. There are a lot of idea threads that fray off and don't go anywhere. Are we supposed to interpret anything from the fact that Miranda has succumbed to throwing a spring florals event, a theme she famously loathes, or are we just supposed to chuckle at the banner and move on? Also, no one in attendance is even wearing anything with flowers. Is the old gal slipping, or is the costume design? Finally, things get going with a funeral, I won't say whose, only that the death makes a fitting twist for an industry already getting the axe. Like Andy, I started writing for newspapers a few years after Craigslist decimated the classified page. My personal version of The Devil Wears Prada would be closer to a grindhouse flick. At least the runway employees look killer at their own wake. Twerpy MBAs force Miranda to fly coach. Of course you snicker, her character hasn't gone past the first class curtain since everyone on board got served a hot meal and plenty of legroom. But there's no schadenfreude watching her squeeze into a middle seat, no glee in her comeuppance. If Miranda Priestley can get thrown in steerage, we're all screwed. The movie is simultaneously more depressing than the original and more saccharine, with a repellent amount of affection between characters who should know better. Tucci's endearingly steadfast Nigel is finally applauded for his years of service to runway, and I was dismayed to find myself rolling my eyes at how corny the moment felt. Frankel and McKenna were geniuses to keep things callous on the first go-round, but they now add a romantic subplot between Andy and an Australian apartment contractor, Patrick Bramall, that detracts from the platonic workplace relationships. It's fan service that I'm not sure fans actually want. Miranda, too, has found love again, and her new husband's part is so small that I kept trying to convince myself that the actor couldn't really be the great Kenneth Branagh. Justin Theroux has a showier, funnier part as the billionaire Benji Barnes who, every time you see him, is holding court about another inane idea or giggling about how a civilization-destroying Pompeii disaster is on the horizon. Terrifyingly, he refers to humans in the third person, as if he no longer considers himself one of our species. Given the film's interest in the figures-gutting journalism and how his character's ex-wife, Lucy Liu, refers to their marriage as being like a rocket ship to a hall of mirrors, he's Jeff Bezos with a sprinkle of Elon Musk. It's pointed timing, given that Bezos is sponsoring May's Met Gala, wrapping the winter cheered event in his brand like a giant cardboard box. But enough about what The Devil Wears Prada 2 has to say about the economy. How are the clothes? Aesthetically, I dug Andy and Miranda's sleek menswear looks, lots of vests and blazers with panache. Narratively, their characters, a heroine and her nemesis, shouldn't dress as though they could swap wardrobes. Then again, they're here aligned as champions of art, beauty, and the press, standing shoulder to shoulder in the all but hopeless fight to protect runway from the Philistines. The real devils wear Fitbits. Maybe it's inevitable that what began as a story about the horrors of working for a magazine has morphed into a story about the horrors of not working for a magazine. Be careful what you wish for and all that. The Devil Wears Prada began as a 2003 novel by Lauren Weisberger, who had been an assistant to mega-famous Vogue editor Anna Wintour. It was the story of a young woman named Andrea, who goes by Andy, who becomes an assistant to the fictional, mega-famous runway editor Miranda Priestley. In the end, Andy flees Miranda's employ, realizing she does not want to ever become as ruthless and unloved as her boss, who never shows her or anyone else an ounce of kindness. The hit 2006 film adapted from the book made a lot of changes, but one was most important: it offered the soft redemption of Miranda, who was played by Meryl Streep. While the movie's Miranda is still nasty, brutish, and short with assistance, she cries over being left by her husband, chuckles affectionately to herself after she sees Andy on the street long after their parting, and most important, helps Andy, played by Anne Hathaway, land a job at a newspaper after she walks out on runway. In The Devil Wears Prada 2, this softening becomes an outright face turn, because the story is no longer about Miranda's treatment of others, it's about everybody getting together to save journalism. As the tale begins, Andy is an award-winning investigative reporter, but when she's abruptly laid off via text, she needs a job. And Elias Clark, the publishing conglomerate that owns the now digital First Runway, needs help, too, following a PR disaster. Hoping for a gloss of respectability, Elias Clark boss IRV Ravitz brings in Andy, who's now gone viral for a full-throat public defense of real journalism, to lead the Runway Features department. And while she never saw herself working for Miranda again, Andy needs a job. Before long, though, her son, BJ Novak, is in charge, and he wants to run the usual playbook of layoffs and cutbacks. It will be the destruction of Runway as Miranda's iron fist has ruled it, and as Andy, for whatever reason, still cherishes it. These events also bring Andy back to her one real Runway mentor, Nigel, Stanley Tucci, who is still Miranda's number 2, as well as her frenemy Emily Blunt, who was once Miranda's other assistant, and who now works at Dior. As Emily explains, retail is the only part of luxury fashion that still makes money. The Devil Wears Prada 2 was always going to feel different from its predecessor. It would be impossible to make a 2026 set fable about a plucky person who finds herself in the lush and carefree world of glossy print magazines. Not unless you set it on a fictional planet, anyway, because no such environment has appeared to exist on Earth in many years. The story they tell here, about a group effort to save the day, feels timely in some ways, but deeply unconvincing in others. On the one hand, the most resonant emotional moments in the film involve Miranda's genuine grief at the potential loss of her position. She sees the devaluing of her own work, of everything she's built, and even of the beauty and artistry she truly believes she tried to champion. Despite their differences, Andy can relate to all this, because she also lost a job she loved and was committed to at the hands of corporate overlords, so they're in the same boat. But on the other hand, are they? Really? Miranda will still have her extraordinary wealth and her many A-list friends, no matter what happens to Runway. Because Meryl Streep is Meryl Streep, she sells the story about Miranda's interiority, her identity. The thing is, Miranda takes private cars everywhere. She grabs a helicopter when she's in a hurry. The crisis in media jobs does affect people's sense of self and sense of purpose, but a woman who was abusive to staff for many years and nevertheless reigned long enough to become outrageously rich and powerful is a strange representative for laid-off journalists. The personal grief is real, but so is not knowing where you're going to get medical insurance or the money to pay your rent, which are not problems this woman is going to have. That's on top of the fact that a lot of media organizations have morale problems, too, and one of the things Miranda built in her career is workplace trauma in other people. The film touches on that fact very, very lightly, but then backs away from it. Miranda's full redemption is one of a few ways in which the story positions a better class of nicer, kinder zillionaires as a potential answer to the woes of the media industry and its workers. And that is going to be a tough sell if you give the idea much thought. Of course, they don't necessarily mean for you to do that. This is a reunion of a bunch of very good actors who know these characters well, though Streep's take on Miranda has changed. It's more broadly comic and less icy, to the point where it's hard to believe people would ever have thought she was all that intimidating. There are montages of people in pretty clothes, there are a couple of reveals of fun cameos, and there are plenty of "oh, I recognize that sweater" nostalgia drops. If there's room for as many bleak and cynical movies that don't make a whole lot of sense as we've seen in recent months and years, then perhaps there's room for great-looking feel-good stories that entertain, even if they do seem a little like commercials for the society of the good kind of very rich people. There's a tremendous amount going on in this film that we haven't even talked about, a rushed romance between Andy and a contractor played by Patrick Bramall of Colin from Accounts, which the movie doesn't need, 2 new assistants played by Simone Ashley and Caleb Heron, who don't get a lot to do, the welcome return of Tracy Toms as Andy's bestie, the abbreviated effort to resolve the matter of Miranda's treatment of Nigel, the weirdo billionaire played by Justin Theroux, stuffing every molecule of scenery directly into his mouth, a small but nicely done turn by Kenneth Branagh as Miranda's current husband. It's a lot. And some of it is fun. But your mean and powerful overlord who made everybody miserable is on your side now, and hey, it turns out she's a lot like you is a tough pill to swallow, even washed down with this much fizzy champagne. Sometimes you don't realize a movie is beloved until they make a sequel to it. Sure, they make sequels to movies that aren't beloved, but that's not a problem for The Devil Wears Prada, which has planted more flags in the zeitgeist than you might think. It gave an iconic role to the already iconic Meryl Streep. It introduced us to one of the brightest talents of the last 20 years, Emily Blunt. And it was the film that made Anne Hathaway a star. In Hollywood terms, that's plenty beloved. The result is a sequel that will be beloved by no one. The Devil Wears Prada 2 is dull as dishwater, which is a really hard feat to pull off when it puts its characters in and out of all manner of couture outfits, and even features a number by Lady Gaga. What makes it so dull is that it is a prolonged and needlessly complicated story of the potential changing of hands of the editorial positions at an August fashion magazine, not to mention the potential changing of ownership of the larger media company that publishes it. That might be what you think a Devil Wears Prada movie should be about, but it is about it in such a lifeless way, lacking in moments of conspicuous cleverness or astuteness. What's worse is that it makes only flimsy gestures toward recognizing how unimportant a fashion magazine is in the grand scheme of the current world climate. The Devil Wears Prada 2 isn't counter-programming. It feels disconnected from the moment. Andrea Sachs, Hathaway, has had her eye on higher-minded things in the 20 years since she was Miranda Priestley's assistant at Runway, a thinly veiled version of the real magazine Vogue, just as Priestley, Streep, is a thinly veiled version of former Vogue editor-in-chief and fashion kingmaker Anna Wintour. Priestley is even going for the very promotion that the real Anna Wintour currently holds, Global Chief Content Officer for the larger media company. But let's not get sidetracked. We were talking about Andy. She's been a mainstream journalist these 20 years, and a pretty successful one, as one of her long-form pieces has just been recipient of a prestigious journalism award. In the interest of screenplay economy, which the movie rarely shows in a full 2 hours of runtime, she and her colleagues at the awards banquet table receive a group text just as she's receiving the award, saying that their venerable publication is being consolidated and that they've all been sacked. As luck would have it, Runway has also fallen on hard times in the wake of a scandal where the magazine did not thoroughly vet a company that used sweatshops to make the fast fashion the magazine endorsed. So the aging owner of the parent company hires Andy as the magazine's new features editor, a decision that was not run by Miranda nor her loyal right-hand man Nigel, Stanley Tucci, also returning from the first movie. Miranda's a bit ticked off she can no longer look down her nose at the woman she once threw her coats at, but she's got bigger things in mind due to her pending promotion, which she may need Andy's help to secure in the form of a well-written mea culpa. Among their apology tour is kissing up to one of their biggest advertisers, Christian Dior, which has another of Miranda's former assistants, Emily Blunt, in a key decision-making position. At his own 75th birthday, her boss keels over, leaving his douchebag son, BJ Novak, in charge, and leaving quite a bit of doubt as to whether the company's new head has any intention of honoring his father's wishes. Thus begins a series of schemes to try to land everyone their dream jobs and save the magazine from the same fate that sunk Andy's former employer in a rapidly changing media industry. The Devil Wears Prada's primary calling card was its cattiness, which created an elevated sense of wickedness and an air of general intelligence and humor in the writing. The Devil Wears Prada 2 recognizes the desirability of having a similar sense of humor, but hasn't the materials to accomplish it in a lean Brosh McKenna's script. This is supposed to be the sort of movie that gaggles of women watch together after a couple Bellinis, but there's nothing in the content here to encourage that sort of convivial atmosphere. It all just feels flat, overly diagrammed and lacking in spunk. There's nothing worse than being a little tipsy and watching something that's putting you to sleep. Returning director David Frankel's movie tries to fill in its notable gaps with funny faces, including Aussie Patrick Bramall as a love interest for Andy, even though she professes she doesn't need one, and Justin Theroux playing a billionaire who's in such constant and frivolous good spurts that it's like he's on laughing gas. He needed to share it with the audience because that shit is not contagious. There's also a small role for Lucy Liu here, and an even smaller role for Kenneth Branagh. We needed a bigger splash in terms of new cast members, and one scene from Lady Gaga wasn't it? This is a professional screenplay, so of course it understands where we're supposed to get the feels, and how each monstrous character should be revealed as an old softie at just the right juncture of the narrative. All this falls equally on deaf ears. We see the wheels turning but we don't feel the momentum. And if we still wore watches like we did when the first movie came out in 2006, we'd be checking them every 2 minutes to see how much closer we are to the estimated end time. Because we are dealing with a film that cares a lot about the superficial, both the characters in the story and, it would seem, the people making the film, it's probably worth meeting them on their level and saying that everyone in this film is remarkably well preserved. It isn't easy to tell that even 5 years have passed since The Devil Wears Prada, let alone 20, given how good everyone looks. Streep herself is 76, Anna Wintour's exact age, yet the approach of her 80th birthday has done nothing to dim her glow. Maybe what those 20 years really mean for the central 4 actors is that they sort of have to do this movie now, even though they might have all been perfectly satisfied closing The Devil Wears Prada chapter of their lives. Put nearly anyone 20 years further into their career in Hollywood, and they've seen their choices diminish, particularly women. That this film has these 3 strong women, but doesn't do much that feels like a positive feminist gesture, indicates just how retrograde this feels, how stuck in a time when magazines actually did still dominate the landscape. I had never seen 2006's The Devil Wears Prada until a few weeks ago when I watched it in preparation for the sequel. I didn't care for it, mainly due to the off-putting character of Miranda Priestley, Meryl Streep. I knew going in that the fashion magazine editor's dialogue was filled with verbal put-downs that were supposedly eccentrically charming, but I mostly just found unfunny, unprofessional, and rude. Such constant negative energy from a person that I didn't see bringing enough positives to the workplace to balance it out. The Miranda character was written to spend more time making demands and throwing shade than acting like she belonged in a position to be so demanding. There was basically only one scene, and granted, it's arguably her most famous scene, where she came off as someone who had truly mastered the ins and outs of the fashion and editorial industries, and the rest of the time I saw little more than a spoiled child. The main character, Miranda's second assistant Andy Sachs, Anne Hathaway, and her supervisor, first assistant Emily Blunt, had their off-putting qualities as well, but at least their misery at working for Miranda was understandable and relatable. Okay, enough ranting against a movie from 20 years ago. The new film opens with Andy and Miranda, having gone their separate ways at the end of the first movie, both in trouble. Andy has just been fired from her job as a news journalist and Miranda is in hot water over her association with an unscrupulous label. The mutual solution is that Andy will go to work as a features editor for Miranda's magazine, trying to restore the Maven's reputation. Miranda has some of her trademark resentment toward Andy for not being her choice to hire, and of course Andy has some resentment toward Miranda for being a bully. It's not all bad for Andy. Her stories get some of the best reviews of her career, and she's able to reconnect with old friends like mentor and fashion editor Nigel, Stanley Tucci. Even Emily is back in the picture, in a high position with magazine ally Chanel, thanks largely to influence from her rich boyfriend, tech bro Benji, Justin Theroux. But at the end of the day, Andy's life is still a nightmare because Miranda is still Miranda. Or is she? She's as condescending as ever, she hasn't let up on that. But this movie is more eager to show a side to her that isn't just condescending. She leads the magazine through a series of crises, from accusations of human rights violations, real ones in overseas factories, not her being snippy in the office, to worries of the brand's future under its new not fashion-conscious owner, BJ Novak, to having to make sure that humans still have a voice in the fashion industry under the looming threat of AI. She even proves to be a laudable journalist, earning compliments from a rich divorcee, Lucy Liu, who thanks Miranda for focusing an exclusive interview on her and not her notorious ex-husband. The Devil Wears Prada 2 shows Miranda doing the work of someone at the top better than the first movie, where the character seemed to take unfair advantage of simply being at the top. The whole movie is better for it? Okay, maybe not the whole movie. Andy's romantic subplot with the contractor, Patrick Bramall, is a slog, and it's annoying to see her fall back into her old habit of craving validation and needing another stop feeling sorry for yourself pep talk from Nigel, which is basically a cut and paste from the first movie. Still, there's plenty to like here, from a fairer share of funny lines to a grander celebration of all things fashionable and luxurious, if that's your thing. But it's the more detailed development of the character of Miranda Priestley that I think is worth celebrating. In 2026, if your dream is to work for a big print fashion magazine based in New York City, you'll need more than talent, drive, or even a trust fund. A time machine is pretty much the only thing that will get you there. There are still a small number of US fashion titles with print editions, but the influence they once wielded has practically vaporized. That's true even at the magazine considered the great-grandmother of them all, Vogue, long overseen by the discriminating, ultra-frosty Anna Wintour. The landscape of magazines in particular, and journalism in general, is much rockier and more barren than it was in 2006, the year The Devil Wears Prada, a picture that mercilessly mocked Wintour and her ilk, was released. To the world at large, magazines barely matter anymore, and imperious editors who dictate what we want to wear, and why, matter even less. What does a Devil Wears Prada sequel look like in the age of influencers, an era where a teenager with a TikTok account can wield more authority than a longtime fashion magazine grand dame? The Devil Wears Prada 2, imperfect as it is actually a better movie than its predecessor. That's not to say you'll necessarily enjoy it more. This is one downer of a fashion fantasy, a movie that's bracingly honest about both the state of magazines and how that affects our perception of fashion today. Directed by David Frankel and written by Aline Brosh McKenna as the earlier movie was, with both based on characters created by Lauren Weisberger, The Devil Wears Prada 2 has some problems. There's barely enough tension in the plot to hold the thing together, and while certain characters profess to care about serious journalism above all else, their heads are a little too easily turned by the allure of posh, and costly, New York real estate that few real journalists could ever afford. But there's also something pleasingly and realistically melancholy about The Devil Wears Prada 2. The earlier film was all about catty remarks, put upon underlings, and crazy outfits, an equation that made it a success. But The Devil Wears Prada didn't love fashion at all. Instead, it presented fashion as something ridiculous, deserving of our mockery. The Devil Wears Prada 2 is both more affectionate toward fashion and more fiercely protective of what, at its best, it can be. Even more broadly, it considers what it means to live in a world that seems to care more about chasing the next thrill than it does about the pursuit of beauty. As comedies go, it might make you a little miserable, especially if you care at all about fashion. But then, comedies exist not only to make us laugh, but to point us toward truths we might otherwise have trouble articulating. This is a movie that knows it's chronicling the end of an era, kind of like The Leopard, but for fashion magazines. In the earlier picture, Anne Hathaway's Andy Sachs was the starry-eyed but beleaguered assistant to Meryl Streep's Miranda Priestley, the Wintour-like editor of Runway magazine, an obvious Vogue stand-in. Now, 20 years later, Andy has achieved her dream of becoming a real journalist. She's become a star at a fictional paper called the New York Vanguard, only to learn, at the very minute she's about to receive a big award for her work, that she and all of her colleagues have been laid off. After putting in so many years of working at being a serious writer, she has no intention of ever returning to the shallow yet cutthroat world of Runway. But a seemingly fortuitous phone call from the magazine's publisher changes her mind. Plus, she needs a job. When she shows up at the runway office, eager to dig into her new position as features editor, Miranda greets her with all the enthusiasm of a lizard whose sunbath has been interrupted by a stray cloud. Miranda hasn't been told that Andy is coming back to the magazine. What's more, she pretends not to remember her at all. Her second-in-command, gimlet-eyed art director Nigel, once again played by Stanley Tucci, hasn't forgotten. He eyes Andy's outfit from top to bottom. It's actually rather simple and chic, as well as, we'll later learn, mostly thrift, and purrs. Look what TJ Maxx dragged in. But all of that is for show. He and Andy are really grudgingly fond of one another. Plus, Runway is in trouble. It recently ran a glowing profile of a company it's called, hilariously, Speed Fash, that, it turns out, is full of lies and propaganda, and Miranda and Nigel are desperately trying to stem the damage. Andy thinks she can help, which means she makes things worse before she makes them better. Meanwhile, her old nemesis Emily Blunt, is now a semi-bigwig at Dior, though she stands to gain even more power over both Runway and the fashion world at large. Her new beau is rich tech goofball Benji Barnes, Justin Theroux, in a sly, observant, and very funny performance, and he's got enough dough to set her up as the doyen of, well, pretty much everything. Those are the bare bones of the Devil Wears Prada 2's plot, but the speed fash crisis is hardly Miranda's biggest problem. She and Nigel are dinosaur survivors of a nearly vanished world. At one point Miranda bemoans the state of her magazine's September issue. At Runway, as at the real-life Vogue, it has historically been the biggest issue of the year, fat with ads, but now, Miranda laments, it's so thin you could floss with it. Nigel observes that even if he had the budget to set up elaborate, imaginative fashion shoots, they barely matter anymore. The magazine's readers scroll through everything so fast they barely absorb the artistry in front of them. Miranda even has a mournful soliloquy about how increasingly depressing it is to live in a world that barely values beauty. If you've come to the Devil Wears Prada 2 looking for laughs, be prepared for a feathery fringe of existential angst on the side. This film, directed by David Frankel, written by Aline Brosh McKenna, based on characters, produced by Wendy Finerman, starring Meryl Streep, cinematography Florian Ballhaus, edited by Andrew Marcus, music by Theodore Shapiro, production company Wendy Finerman Productions, distributed by 20th Century Studios, release dates April 20, 2026, running time 119 minutes, country United States, language English, budget $100 million, box office $689.4 million.